Chapter 1001. Pages that weren't there yesterday. Truly reaching the realm of demigod wasn't louder or brighter. It was quieter. The world stopped arguing with me. Floors kept their promises. Air stopped trying to have opinions. When I lifted Valeria, space met the edge halfway instead of insisting on a committee meeting. It also shoved a lot of my old habits into the attic. Arts that had carried me through wars suddenly felt busy. Busy gets you hit at this level. If I wanted a storm, gray was a better storm. If I wanted calm, lucent harmony held without drama. If I needed to write a room, Mythweaver did it in 3 short sentences. The element chains and proud sequences that used to make sense were garnish now. Useful for strangely specific jobs, sure. Otherwise, noise. I wasn't going to throw them out. They built the hands I have. The task was to make them smaller and sharper. Elevate, not erase. Stella sat on my lap while I brooded, pencil moving like a conductor's baton. Her worksheet was a battlefield of fractions and modular arithmetic. She was humming under her breath in that way she does when the problem is fun and the rest of us are too slow. "Daddy," she said, not looking up. "What's the multiplicative inverse of 11 mod 27? 5, I said. She checked, nodded, and wrote, "You're still good. I live for your approval." "I know," she said, and reached for her eraser. I slid the old list across the coffee table and winced. Spectral Sword, Tempest Dance, the CQC set, God Flash and all its cousins, Hollow Eclipse, Stellar Cascade, Pond of Tranquility, World's Edge. They'd each saved my life more than once. Run exactly as written now, they'd get me killed. Too many joints for a god, or a clever radiant, to stick a finger in and say no. I took out the book my master left me. Magnus' manual looked the same as always. Reinforced leather, softened corners, the faint scent of resin and rain. I'd read it a dozen times. Today, when I opened it, the margins breathed. Ink I couldn't see before thickened on the page, like the paper had been waiting for my wrists to learn something. Not words at first. Pressure. The sense of a pen pressed with a certain weight and a certain breath. Cord let me feel his hand. Somewhere in those marks, he'd laughed at himself and hidden a rude joke only a demigod would ever find. "Show off." "Magic book?" Stella asked, catching the look on my face. "Magic book," I said. "Cool," she said, which was the correct review. The first page that mattered wore a title he'd pretended was philosophy. Reduce until it sings. The sentences were simple enough to be hard. If the room decides with you, the form should get smaller. Trade ornament for inevitability. Keep the piece that moves mountains and throw away the piece that looks good on posters. "Okay," I told the air. The house did not argue. I started with Spectral Sword. It used to be an afterimage trick, shadows of a blade to make people flinch at the wrong thing. Fine against humans. Wasteful now. At a chord, the room could carry the ghost for me. So I changed the frame. Not illusions, not shimmer. I left the memory of a cut hanging in the air for a breath, so the next angle landed into someone who already believed it happened. Spectral Accord. No smoke, just compliance. Stella tried the words out. "Spectral Accord," she said. "Sounds like a band that only plays on rainy days." "Very moody band," I agreed. Tempest Dance used to snowball, picking up wind with each spin until the last exchange hit like weather. Spinning costs time, and time is where knives live. I trimmed it down to still Tempest. One ordinary-looking step, one ordinary-looking cut, but I hold the storm inside the angle. It looks boring. Then it isn't. "Boring is strong," Stella said, tongue poking at the side of her mouth as she simplified something monstrous into something pretty. "Boring keeps roofs on buildings," I said. God Flash was easier to rescue. I didn't need light tricks. I needed placement. Lantern wasn't speed at all. It was an invitation. You light a spot in space so the next honest step wants to fall there. Accord sets the step. The edge is already waiting. Perigee shortened the horizon. 2 steps feel like one, and the far side of a room acts local. Singularity stayed, but I trimmed it down to a heartbeat. Options inside a three-pace bubble simply decide to be the one I chose. No thunder. Just agreement. Hollow eclipse became full eclipse. I stopped pretending to cut shadows. I cut the follow-through out of a hostile technique with a blade-thin veto and let my own edge arrive in the pause where momentum died. Stellar Cascade had always been a pretty arrogance. A stack of angles that overwhelmed guard. Pretty is expensive. Falling Orchard drops 3 cuts that look unrelated until the last breath, then prove they were one thought all along. Minimal travel, maximum inevitability. Pond of Tranquility was still perfect. Permission for the room to hush. It just needed to be quieter in my hands now. World's Edge didn't need changing. World's Edge is a closing argument, and you don't edit closing arguments. You save them for when the room insists on one. I turned to the CQC notes and felt a little fondness for the younger version of me who had filled those margins with enthusiasm, arrows, and phrases like, hit here, not there, idiot. The goal used to be bones and joints. At this tier, the frame behind the body is the better target. Arc hook spiral evolved into frame turn. A touch at the shoulder that spirals the stance a degree. The body follows the frame like a polite guest. Openings appear without making noise. Ground reversal stomp turned into gravity reply. A mild heel drop that makes the floor give the opponent their own weight back. Not a slam. A refund. Phantom step knee became ghost beat. My knee arrives where their timing still thinks I am not. Flicker palm trimmed down into switch. Harmony through the palm to toggle aggression off. It wins you a breath, and breaths win fights. 1 inch and 0 inch collapsed into no distance. Not force without travel. Location without permission. The palm is already where it needs to be because the room let it be there. That is the one I won't demonstrate in the living room. Tables are expensive. On a page I used to skip, because it read like a sermon, fresh marks rose with my pulse. Make 5 pocket forms, it said without saying. No posture. No flourish. Always ready. If you can't do them while holding a child and a cup of tea, they're too big. All right, I told Magnus Ghost. 5 it is. I stood Valeria upright against the coffee table and tried them, small enough not to wake the roses on the balcony. Greeting was just a nod of blade or wrist that made the next attack arrive at a friendly angle. It looked like etiquette. It wasn't. Refusal was a tiny down and across that removed the part of their technique that mattered and left the rest to be confused. Borrowed step was delightful. I let my foot be their intent for a beat and arrived where they had kindly paid for me to be. Anchor was heel, hip, harmony, instant stabilizer. You can do it mid-hug. Receipt was a 3-centimeter whisper of steel that arrived the moment they spent big and expected change. Stella watched out of the corner of her eye while pretending not to. Can you do those while holding a sandwich? Yes. Then they're good, she said. I wrote the new names in the manual and felt the paper warm, like the book was pleased we were finally talking to each other properly. On the far right margin, a line I had missed every other time deepened under my thumb. If your blade and the room agree, can the world be your scabbard? Draw anywhere. Not yet, I told the page. Soon. The thought about Magnus circled as it always does. He wasn't the only person who taught me to build hands worth trusting. Lee Zenith, Alastair, Charlotte, Tiamat, Julius, even the first Arthur had shoved tools at me. But he was the one who put a spine in my stance when I was still young enough to bend the wrong way. He gave me Nixthar and a better idea of what a cut could be, then died like a hero and left me a book that grows new pages when I do. You were right about reducing until it sings, I said. Quiet enough the house didn't feel the need to file it. Sorry it took me this long to hear the tune. Stella finished a line of algebra that would make a college student cry and flipped her worksheet over like a magician. Daddy. When are we doing projects again? I made 3 new ideas while you were gone. 1 is for school kids to see mana better. 1 is for elevators to not be boring. 1 is a secret. The elevator one worries me, I said. It should, she said cheerfully. The secret one is safe. Mostly. We'll schedule a demonstration with fire extinguishers, I said. After a trip. What trip? Important to me, I said. Important like teacher important. He taught me how to make my hands worth trusting. He died before you came home. I think he'd like to meet you anyway. She went very still, like numbers do before they decide to be beautiful. Can I bring flowers? Yes. Blue ones, she decided. Blue looks like quiet. Perfect, I said. She slid off my lap, gathered her worksheets, and loaded her bag with the unbothered chaos of a genius who trusts future her. Then she hugged the manual because she had seen me do it with my eyes. This belonged to him? It did. Then we'll show him we read it, she said, and that was that. I tucked the book away. Valeria hummed in the soft, smug way swords hum when they approve of your homework. The house stayed a house. The air didn't reach for me. That is what I want rooms to do when I stand up. Nothing special, just the right thing. I lifted Stella with one arm because I could and because she likes the view from there. She looped her arms around my neck and tucked her head under my jaw, exactly where worries go quiet. I let Gray draw a neat, dull seam in the air and opened it to a place with wind that smells like pine and stone and old vows. Now? She asked. Now. Okay, she said, and then added, because she is who she is. On the way, can we factor a polynomial I made? It has personality. Of course, I said. We stepped through together. The blue roses on the balcony pretended not to watch us leave. The city breathed. The book warmed against my side. Somewhere ahead, a high place waited with a name I still say like a prayer. Let's go see my master, I said. Stella nodded, very solemn and very 12. We will tell him you kept your promises, she said. And we'll show him the new math. Chapter 1002. Quiet on the 7th peak. Gray folded space like paper and let us through. One step, and the living room's soft light became knife-clear mountain air. The world smelled like snow and pine and old stone warmed by sun. Wind tugged at Stella's hair. She squinted into it, grinning the way she does when a problem has an elegant answer. Mount Hua's spines rose in ranks to the horizon. Hard, blue-white, absolute. Prayer banners flickered along a lower ridge, their colors bright as candy against the rock. The sect had already cleared a corridor for us. I'd pinged them 10 minutes earlier, and polite ghosts in white had answered with a clear path and silence. The grave sat alone on the 7th peak, not because there weren't other heroes, but because this height belonged to one man. The headstone was a single block of diamond, cut in planes that caught the sky and made it look like the world was remembering itself. Someone, Serafina, of course, had inset veins of pale etherite that pulsed once every few heartbeats. Not bright, just steady. The light didn't show off, kept watch. The carving was plain. Magnus Dracar, paragon of humanity. Martial king and warden of the East. Slayer of the vampire monarch. Under that, a date that still felt like a mistake when I read it. He should have gotten more years, then fewer at the end. Stella knelt without me telling her to. I went down beside her and the cold bit my knees through my pants, which felt appropriate. Wind tore across the peak and then folded itself up and sat down like it had been reminded to use inside voices. Master, I said, and my voice went smaller on its own. Your unworthy disciple is here. I hadn't come since the stone set. I had sent Etherite when we started refining from the first moon hall. I had signed off on plans and asked Serafina if she needed anything, then kept my head full of work and distance. The truth was simpler and uglier. I didn't want to stand in front of the last cut he'd made when mine still fell short of it. I owed him better than my pride. I wasn't proud today. I was late. There's a difference. I'm sorry it took me so long to greet you like this, I said. Nixthar's still as beautiful as it was in your hands. It sings less often with me than Valeria does. But when it does, it feels like winter knows my name. I'll bring it next time. Stella set a small bouquet of blue roses on the stone. She'd chosen them because blue looks like quiet. They looked like honesty. Wind tried to steal a petal. The etherite veil hummed, and the petal thought better of it. I told him the things I should have said sooner. I kept it simple because he'd always preferred clean lines to impressive speeches. The end of the Eastern War. The duels I won that I had no business winning. The fights I lost that taught me more than winning would have. The second ancient undead and the day Erebus laughed at me for naming him something dramatic and then answered anyway. The 5 women who said yes when I asked badly. Stella, who didn't wait for me to ask at all. The immortal gate. The moon. Alara. The break, the fall, the climb. The day I brought the second calamity down and woke up in a city that still had buildings because people I loved had held them upright while I swung. I didn't linger on pain. He'd known all along that pain would come with the job. I didn't waste his time with victories for the sake of the noise they make. I told him what changed my hands. Today, I said simply, I crossed. The wind chose that moment to calm. Not a sign. Just good timing. I'll take it. Stella hadn't moved. She cradled her hands together in her lap like the air inside them was worth protecting. She looked at the letters on the stone like she was solving something that mattered and would not fit on a page. I rested my palm against the diamond. Cold went up my arm to the elbow and settled there. Not biting, just present. The etherite under the surface pulsed once, and my harmony answered without me asking it to. Respect looks like many things. Today it looked like a ward letting a hand through because it had the right voice. Thank you, I said. For giving me a cut I could spend the rest of my life trying to understand. For putting a spine in my stance and a limit over my head I couldn't see past until it broke. I bowed. It wasn't a formal thing. I just let my head hang for a breath and made sure my chest went soft the way he had taught me. Don't bow like you're still trying to win. I didn't continue your line, I said. Reika did that better than I would have. You'd like her lectures. They're terrified of being wrong. I smiled. Felt right to let a smile in here. She'll cross. When she does, I think your notes will show her pages I couldn't read. I stayed there with my hand on the stone until the cold became background and the quiet grew the right size. The etherite warmth sat under my palm like a heartbeat that belonged to the mountain, not the man. The mountain keeps the heart when the heart can't keep itself. That's how graves work when they're done right. I told him one more truth because if there's a place to say it, it's here. Master, I said, even if this generation climbs higher than you will always be the martial king in my head. Not because you killed a monster I couldn't. Because you walked back down after you did and made sure kids had teachers. If you hadn't held that front, none of us would have had the years to grow into the people we will be. Including me. Wind moved the prayer banners in the distance. It sounded like pages turning. Stella took my free hand and squeezed. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. She knows when I'm speaking to one person and she is not meant to be the echo. When it was time, I stood. My knees complained. The mountain did not apologize. It never had. Goodbye for now, I said. And it didn't feel like a promise I was going to break. I'll come back. The hardest part had always been returning the first time. We stayed long enough for Stella to trace every letter with her eyes and get the spacing right in her head. Then I lifted her. She's getting taller. I'm pretending I don't notice, and set her on my hip. She looped her arms around my neck and rested her cheek against my collarbone like it was a pillow she'd found in a fort she built herself. Ready? I asked. Ready, she said. Gray opened for us without drama, because I didn't ask it to do anything complicated. The seam folded the cold away and unfolded the smell of tea and home, and for a second I felt the same stupid relief I felt when I was 15 and a roof kept rain off me like it was a miracle. We stepped into the living room. The blue roses on the balcony had turned their faces toward the sunset. The city hummed like a patient machine. Valeria gave a pleased little hiss from the wall where she rested. The sound swords make when a job is finished and no one died. Stella slid down, dropped her bag on the couch, and looked up at me with eyes that were too serious for 12 and exactly right for 12. Daddy, she said, tell me about him. I'd expected questions later, maybe at bedtime when the dark makes titles softer. The directness hit me in the sternum. I opened my mouth and nothing clever came out. She waited, hands folded behind her back, trying to look less excited than she was. I could see her deciding where to put the story in her head, what shelf it needed, what label. What do you want to know? I asked because that's how you start a problem you respect. All of it, she said, as if the word were reasonable. How he taught you to hold a sword without being mean to your hands. What Nixthar sounds like when it sings. Why he smiled the way he did in the picture at the academy. How the air stops feeling sharp when you stand like you're not pretending. Why people call him king if he didn't sit on a throne. What he said when you did things wrong. Did he like tea? Did he laugh? Did he ever lose? Did he ever cheat? Did he tell jokes? Did he? She ran out of breath and scowled at the injustice of lungs. I laughed, quiet and surprised by my own voice. I can answer some of those, I said. Maybe not all. Chapter 1003. The Man Who Taught My Dad. The house felt different when we got back from the mountain. Not spooky different. The opposite. Like someone had gone through every room and quietly turned down the noise you don't notice until it stops. Dad set me down, and the blue roses on the balcony pretended they weren't eavesdropping. Daddy, I said, because if I didn't say it right away I knew it would get stuck in my throat. Tell me about him. He didn't ask who. He just nodded once and sat. I pulled him to the couch and folded my legs under me and waited the way I wait for a tricky proof to start making sense. Magnus Drakkar, he said, like the name fizzed on his tongue. Martial King, Warden of the East, Slayer of the Vampire Monarch. And my master. The way he said master made my chest feel warm and careful at the same time. He grew up ordinary, Dad went on. Third son of the Drakkar family. Solid people, not flashy. Their big advantage was a friendship with the Windwards. When Magnus was a kid, he met Arden Windward, already brilliant, already a force. Magnus admired him. They both loved the sword. One shone like a star. One practiced until his hands ached. So a two-variable system with unequal coefficients, I said. Dad smiled. Yes. Then the North turned messy. Arden's grandfather died. Leadership shifted. And while Arden went out to get stronger, petty lords realized they suddenly liked the taste of ambition. They struck at everyone under the Windward's shadow to see who would bleed. The Drakkars bled. He looked past me for a second, like the air had a memory taped to it. Magnus lived, he said. By accident or cruelty. He watched what was left of home burn down. And then Arden came back and made the people responsible kneel. But that didn't fix the part inside Magnus that had learned what powerlessness feels like. My fingers curled on their own. I know the feeling, not from battles or crowns, from nights where bad dreams have too many teeth. He told me once, Dad said, voice low, that despair became his fire. He didn't let it eat him. He used it. He left the North. Arden asked him to stay and be safe. Magnus couldn't. He trained, and he bloomed. It sounded pretty when Dad said it. Bloomed, like something chose to be alive. He rose fast, Dad said. Radiant rank in a decade. Then he did something almost everyone said wasn't real. He kept climbing. When he thought he was ready, he went to Mount Hua. I knew this part. My heart still jumped. He stepped on their plum blossoms, Dad said. No drama, just the photograph of a moment. Mo Zenith, their sect leader, brought out everything. His violet mist divine art, his reputation, his calm. Magnus broke the art and the man's pride. Then he kept going. 9 radiant rankers across the world, he fought them all and won. When he went home, Arden was waiting. They fought. Magnus won. Sometimes victory ends a friendship. That was one of those times. I didn't say anything for a stretch. People always write about legends like everything they do sits on a gold shelf. Hearing Dad talk, it sounded like the shelf was made of choices that didn't come with instructions. What was he like with you? I asked. Dad's mouth tipped. Not a sad smile. The kind you make for a secret that treats you kindly. I met him as a student who needed someone to make his hands worth trusting, he said. We trained in a hotel gym for 3 weeks. He told me he liked teaching me. He said I reminded him of him. He pushed. He promised to keep pushing. He put a book in my hand and Nixthar in my future, and then he went and did the hardest thing anyone can do at the end. He made sure the East would live without him. The room held still for us. Even the air seemed to wait. I swallowed. He would have liked me? Came out smaller than I wanted. He would have loved you, Dad said at once. You ask good questions. You notice quietly. You don't stop when the answer is ugly. He liked honest things. You're one of those. I pretended I wasn't going to cry and reached for my slate before my eyes could get shiny. The screen woke with a soft chime, and my feed bloomed into view over the coffee table. I typed Magnus Drakkar and the network fetched the world. A memorial page from the Eastern Council loaded first. Gray banner, white text, too many adjectives. Paragon, indomitable, unfaltering. Adults love stacking words when one would do. There was a simple photo that didn't try to be clever. Magnus in a black coat, hair wind-tangled, a sword that wasn't showing off, eyes looking just past the camera like they'd seen a horizon and decided to go there. I found an old interview fragment, grainy, recorded after the Mount Hua match when microphones were still afraid to get in his way. Master Drakkar was stepping on the Blossom's disrespect? Someone asked with those sharp reporter consonants. I don't step on flowers for fun, Magnus said. But I won't pretend ground is sacred when people are dying in the valley. Beauty that protects nothing is a painting. I liked him a lot in that second. There was a clip from a training seminar. No commentary, no soundtrack, just the quiet slide of feet and a blade that moved like it didn't have to explain itself. The caption said, Nixthar demonstration, single cut, pressure shift. The camera didn't catch the important thing because cameras never do. I watched Dad watching the screen, which told me more. His shoulders went a little straighter, like the motion inside the video corrected his stance across time. Then I tripped over a grainy still from an old Windward event. Arden and Magnus side by side as teenagers, wearing formal nonsense, both trying not to look like they wanted to escape. Arden's smile spilled warmth. Magnus' smile looked like he'd borrowed it and was returning it clean. I opened a longer article that stitched pieces of truth into a neat sweater. The Drakkars, the Night of Fire, the return of a prince, the promise to never be saved again. A pull quote I liked best. We don't get to choose the season, but we choose how to bloom. I saved it in a folder called People Who Knew What They Were Doing, which already had 5 names and a picture of a blue rose. I found a clip from the Vampire War coverage that I almost closed because I don't like the way broadcasters make suffering look like high drama. The image caught me before my hand could swipe it away. Not the fight. The moment after. Magnus on a cliff. His sword lowered. The camera too far away to pretend intimacy. His shoulders carried tired like a coat. Not a wound. It made my throat do that tight thing again. I put the slate down and leaned into Dad's side. He didn't say anything clever. He just put his hand on my hair and let his fingers rest there like a roof. Do you miss him? I asked into his shirt. I miss getting to show him the mess I made of his lessons and watching him pretend to be annoyed, he said. I miss hearing him say, again, the exact same way whether I did something right or wrong. I miss how the room got quiet when he breathed right. That part you have, I said. He huffed a laugh. Working on it. I thought about despair the way he'd described it. Not as a swamp. As an equation that needed a useful variable on the other side. Convert negative to work. I wrote in my head. Not for a test. For a day where something sharp arrives and tries to take my father away. What did he say when you messed up? I asked because people show their truest shape when the person they love does something clumsy. He never got loud, Dad said. He would lift a finger a centimeter and say, not that, this. Then he'd make me do it until my hands learned to be honest. When I pretended, he waited me out. When I rushed, he breathed. When I did something right, he didn't clap. He just looked at me like the next step already existed. Did he ever cheat? I asked because I wanted to know where the lines are for heroes. At the end of a match, Dad said. If the lesson wanted to stick and pride would get in the way otherwise. A little nudge. A foot where it shouldn't be. A joke hidden in a cut. Nothing mean. Good, I said. I picked up the slate again. Somewhere in the scroll stack was a lecture he'd given about breath. The transcript opened on a sentence I loved instantly. If your lungs are kind to you, be kind back. I saved that one too. Daddy. Can we go again? To his grave. Not today. Soon. I want to tell him you kept your promises. And I want to bring better flowers. The blue looked right, but I can grow a version that holds its shape in the wind and smells like the first time you open a book. He squeezed my shoulder. We'll go. I checked the time because somewhere in there I had homework that wasn't going to do itself, even if the math was scared of me. The wall display chimed with a polite reminder. The calendar pane slid over my feet. I frowned, then grinned so hard it hurt a little. What? Dad asked, picking up the tiny shift in my bones like always. Nothing, I said, because that's what you say when it's not nothing at all. Just a reminder. He raised an eyebrow. His eyebrows are very good at asking questions. My birthday, I admitted. In 2 weeks. 13. Saying it made the number feel like it jumped up a year and waved. I didn't want to push it while you were saving the world. But I want to do something that isn't cake. What did you have in mind? A project, I said immediately. A small one, not explosive. Mostly, a thing that tells a story. About your master, and about you, and about blue roses that look like quiet. He smiled in that way that makes rooms better at being rooms. That sounds perfect. We sat there for a while, not moving, while the city hummed and the flowers turned their faces to the late light and the house remembered us the way houses do. I thought about a man who stepped on blossoms because the valley needed him too, and about a boy who looked at that and decided to become the kind of person who could carry such decisions without breaking. I'm not like them. I don't need to be. I get to be me. I get to build. I get to make tiny rules that help big hearts breathe. That was enough to make my chest feel too small for what was inside it. 2 weeks, Dad said softly, as if he'd been reading my calendar by the way I was sitting. We'll make something beautiful. Deal, I said, and made a note in my slate. Project Blossom. Materials, blue. Story, honest. Math, elegant. Risk, acceptable. The roses pretended not to approve. The house pretended not to listen. The evening pretended not to be perfect. 13 was on its way. Chapter 1004. Stella's birthday. Stella's birthday started like a mission and turned into a small festival. Reka had a clipboard, which meant the event was officially serious. Rose filled the penthouse with blue roses that looked like quiet. Rachel walked around with a tiny lantern set to safe, purifying surfaces that didn't know they needed it. Serafina used a fingertip of ice to chill glasses from the inside because apparently water obeys her moods now. Cecilia inspected the table settings like an empress doing a surprise audit and then declared them acceptable, which is palace speak for perfect. I did what fathers do best. Moved furniture, carried boxes, and tried not to cry when I looked at the photo wall we'd built. Stella from 11 to 12 to almost 13, taller in each frame, grin steady, eyes brighter. Master, confirm cake altitude, Reka said, deadpan, holding a level up to the bottom tier of a cake that could legally vote in 3 provinces. We aren't landing a shuttle, I said. Correct, she replied. The cake is more important. Callie arrived first. Brash grin, sharp heels, hair pinned up like she could fight a war between appetizers. Jean followed, immaculate as always, offering a gift bag and an apology for being 3 minutes early. I'm never upset by punctual presents, I said, taking the bag. Elias appeared exactly on time because of course he did, carrying a plain box that probably contained something with a manual and a waiver. Hovercars hummed past the balcony, city lights starting their evening glow. My parents came in hand. Douglas with that proud, quiet warmth that can hold a whole room together, and Alice with the kind of calm that shelves storms. Arya zipped through the door like a comet, Marcus at her side with the polite smile of a man who knows he's joined a family where chaos wears tuxedos. Is the birthday girl ready? Alice asked, eyes soft. Ready, Stella said, stepping out from the hall in a simple blue dress with a constellation of tiny silver dots at the hem. She looked 13 and exactly like herself. She stopped, took in the room, the people, the flowers, the dumb banner I'd fought for. Happy 13, Stella, in math font, and her whole face turned into light. Daddy, she said, very quietly. Yeah, I said very quietly. Then 5 women swooped at once. Happy birthday, Rose said first, hugging her with enough care to squeeze the air out of my daughter without breaking a single petal. My Stella? Reka murmured, smoothing a flyaway hair like she was pressing a seal. Congratulations. 13, Rachel announced, beaming. Prime number. Good omen. Cecilia tried not to smile and failed. As your empress? She caught herself, glanced at me, and amended. As your mom, I authorize a day of maximum joy. Serafina didn't say anything. She just kissed Stella's forehead and handed her a small glass snowflake that chimed once and held the note in the air like a memory. Thank you, Moms, Stella said, perfectly serious and perfectly happy. If you told me a decade ago that sentence would become daily maintenance for my heart, I would have asked you to repeat it slower. We did the first round of gifts before cake because Reka had a schedule, and I have learned that resisting schedules in my own home is a great way to eat cold soup standing up. Reka went first, a rolled canvas bundle tied in violet ribbon. Stella unrolled a set of hand-stitched tool wraps, slots for pliers, tweezers, microdrivers, each pocket labeled in tiny neat script. At the end, a slender steel ruler etched with property of Stella Nightingale. Return if found. Reward, cookies. I made extra pockets, Reka said, for the tools you will invent. Stella hugged her. Mom, Reka, this is perfect. Rose's turn. A small wooden box. Inside, labeled seed vials and a thin book. Blue Rose variant Quiet Bloom. The cover read. Tolerates wind. Holds scent after sunset. I wrote the notes on how to keep them stubborn, Rose said. They'll smell like the first time you open a book. Stella blinked very fast and put the box down very carefully. Rachel offered a slender silver chain with a simple charm, a clear disc cut like a lens. Family piece, she said lightly. It doesn't look like much. It isn't supposed to. If miasma stares at you, it will stare back and get bored. Cecilia handed over an envelope like she was delivering a verdict. A research microgrant under the Empire's Young Innovators Fund, she said, for your Manavisualizer device. It pays suppliers who don't answer texts from 12-year-olds. Stella made a sound that was mostly air and gratitude. Thank you, Mom Cecilia. Serafina's present was that glass snowflake. Touch the center when you want to keep a moment, she said. It will hold 10 that matter. No do-overs. Choose with care. Arya, radiating little sister energy as always, gave Stella a hoodie with a stitched constellation and a pocket big enough for 3 notebooks and a sandwich. Marcus, polite and prepared, added a microfabrication lab pass for a facility he apparently owned half of. Supervised access, he said, but we'll bend the rules for birthdays. Jin's gift was a formal card and a key fob. Western Royal Labs invites you for a summer residency, he said warmly. Design your own project. We'll keep the board out of the room. Callie bumped Stella's shoulder. And I'll make sure no one talks down to you. If they do, I'll rearrange their expectations and their budget. Elias cleared his throat and set his box on the table. Inside was a plain rectangle of matte black glass. Ops-grade workbench tablet, he said. Secure. Offline capable. Comes with a do not tell your father what you're doing switch. Don't use that one. Elias, I said. Joke, he said, without blinking, which absolutely did not help. My parents brought a photo Magnus on the 7th peak, taken from far enough away that it felt more like seeing a moment than a man. Alice had framed it in simple wood. For your project, she told Stella. And for the wall. Stella hugged them both and tucked the frame against her chest like it was fragile and important. It was both. In the kitchen, steam drifted from bamboo baskets and copper pots. Reka's team executed like a military unit that took seconds as a personal insult. The city beyond the glass swung from late afternoon to evening. The blue roses along the balcony shifted their faces toward the changing light, pretending not to eavesdrop. Food in 7, Reka announced. Is there a briefing packet? Callie asked, already stealing a skewer. There was, Reka said. Until you ate page 3. Worth it, Callie replied. Jean leaned into me. She looks happy. She is, I said. Everyone showed up. That is why she's happy, he said, and the simple weight of it landed where it should. Cecilia drifted by with Rachel and Rose, discussing the microgrants reporting requirements like they were designing a fairer world between bites. Serafina checked the freezer and declared the sorbets ready. Arya taught Marcus the secret family handshake, which is just a normal handshake done upside down for no reason. My father demonstrated a pancake flip with a party plate as a prop. Alice adjusted 3 plates by half an inch and made the table look inexplicably better. Team, I called, clapping once. Snacks now, cake later, chaos throughout. Stella lifted her hands like a conductor and the room obliged, voices braiding and unbraiding, the air full of steam and small laughter. We were halfway through dumplings when I caught Stella watching the photo wall. The frames showed tiny shifts in posture. Sleepy, excited, stubborn, proud. You could see the exact moment she decided numbers were a language she wanted to speak fluently. You could also see the day she decided 5 women were moms, full stop. She noticed me noticing and smiled. It's weird, she said. What is? Seeing yourself grow like a graph. You're trending well, I said. She rolled her eyes, then grinned at me the way she did when a proof clicked. Reka tapped her watch. Intermission, she called. Second wave of gifts after snacks. Save room. This is not a drill. The room obeyed. It always does when someone with a clipboard and a kitchen voice speaks. I took a breath and let the picture settle. My daughter ringed by people who would move continents for her. 5 women who call themselves mom on purpose. My parents steady as old trees. Friends who outrank kings and still show up on time with gifts. Steam and music and light. Stella caught me staring and lifted a dumpling like a toast. Best birthday, she mouthed. She was right. Chapter 1005. Stella's birthday, 2. Dinner moved like a tide. Arriving in waves, retreating into jokes, returning with noodles that had the exact right bite. Reka's kitchen army stacked empty steamers like trophies. Serafina sent 2 sorbets out as a preview and made the freezer sound pleased. The city leaned into night outside our windows, hover lights humming over the avenues like polite fireflies. Round 2, Reka announced, clapping once. Final gifts before cake. Arya dragged Marcus to the front. He was going to gift you a calculus problem, she said. But I slapped his hand. I brought a lab pass, Marcus protested. Supervised hours. Safety modules pre-cleared. See, Arya said, smug. Growth. Jean and Callie exchanged a look that said, politics later, cake now. The residency stands, Jean told Stella. If you'd rather do it during school breaks, we'll arrange tutors. And a corner office, Callie added, with a window and a door you can lock when men talk loudly. I'm 12, no 13, Stella corrected herself. So I will take a door, but not the men. Smart girl, Alice said, passing by with a tray. Elias lifted a hand. One addendum to the tablet. I snuck in a build of the sim suite we use for city-scale evacuation models. The stripped down and safe. You can test your mana visualizer routing on fake data before anyone spends real fuel. Stella's eyes went wide. Thank you, Uncle Elias. He blinked, then nodded once, like someone had promoted him quietly and he didn't want to scare it away. My parents set their gift on the table between us. The framed photo of Magnus, 7th Peak Blue and Winter Light. Stella touched the corner of the frame and looked at me. For your project, Alice repeated gently. Stories deserve good anchors. Thank you, Grandma, Stella said. Douglas went suspiciously still for a second and then pulled both of them into a hug that lasted exactly as long as it needed to. Cleared my throat. My turn. I sat and patted my knee, and Stella climbed up like she'd never stopped being small. Rules say I can't give you a particle cannon, I said. Boo, Cecilia murmured. However, I continued, I can give you this. I opened my palm. A flat ring rested there, dull, unassuming, threaded with an almost invisible seam. It's a pocket frame, I said. Not a big gray door. Just enough to hold a workspace the size of a shoebox. It keeps experiments from escaping and keeps noise from bothering neighbors. It works only for you. Stella turned it in the light and smiled so wide the room got brighter. Thank you, Daddy. Also, I added, because I am constitutionally incapable of leaving well enough alone. I booked us a weekend at Mount Hua. We'll bring flowers. We'll tell stories. We'll do your project right. Her arms tightened around my neck. No words. None needed. Food, then speech, then cake, Rekha said, checking the clipboard like the world depended on it. We ate. The table became a respectable disaster, sauce drips, crumb trails, the polite casualties of a good meal. Conversations braided and unbraided across the room. Callie leaned over to Jean. If she takes that residency, I want first refusal on the patent. Negotiate with her counsel, Jean said, nodding toward me. Her counsel just gave her a shoebox universe, Callie said. I'm doomed. Arya cornered Marcus with a plate of dumplings. If you ask her math questions as a gift, I will end you. I brought a lab pass, he repeated, scandalized. I'm not a monster. My father taught Stella how to flip a pancake in a dry pan without destroying the ceiling. Alice sat with Cecilia and Rachel, heads close, talking softly about how to give children power without letting the world take their childhood to pay for it. Serafina tuned the room temperature with tiny gestures, like a conductor coaxing a string section. I stood back for a moment and let it all happen. The blue roses breathed. The city hummed. For someone whose job sometimes involves stopping catastrophes with one hand while writing new laws with the other, this was the hardest, best kind of work. Hold a room where people you love get to be people. Speech, Rachel called, cupping her hands. Dad, words. Now. I tapped my glass with a spoon. One polite clink. 13, I said, looking at the person who mattered most tonight. You are brilliant in ways that scare me, brave in ways I don't deserve, and kinder than I am on my best day. You asked me this week to tell you about my master. He would have liked you for your questions and loved you for the way you listen. Stella's chin wobbled. Mine did not, obviously. I have fought a lot of things, I went on. Some of them rude, some of them ancient, some of them both. I didn't win those fights because I had the biggest sword. I won because I had a reason. You are a very good reason. Daddy, she said helplessly. So, I finished. Happy birthday, Stella Nightingale. May your projects be fun, your math be elegant, your mistakes be small and instructive, and your world be full of people who clap when the pancake doesn't hit the ceiling. Applause. Laughter. Cecilia pretended to dab her eyes like a scandalized duchess. Rekha handed me a napkin without looking because she knew I'd need one. I did. Cake time. Rekha lit 13 slim candles. Stella took a breath, looked around at her 5 moms, her grandparents, her aunt and almost uncle, friends who outrank kings and still show up on time with gifts, and then closed her eyes. She didn't say her wish out loud. Good. Wishes like that deserve privacy. She blew. All 13 went out at once. The room cheered like we'd survived a war. In our house, sometimes those are the same thing. We cut cake. Frosting found noses. Elias lost a bet about whether Serafina could slice a perfect wedge with a thread of ice. She could. Jean tried to be dignified and failed when Stella smudged his cheek. Callie pretended to be furious and failed harder. Later, when the music softened and people drifted into clusters, Alice and Rose arguing gently about soil, Douglas and Marcus trading grill techniques like state secrets, Arya and Rachel teaching Stella a card game that I suspect was invented 5 minutes ago. Stella tugged my sleeve. Project Reveal, she whispered. We dimmed the lights. She set a glass dome on the coffee table, placed one of Rose's blue roses under it, and tapped the pocket frame ring I'd given her. The dome hummed. Gentle light laced through the petals. When she spoke, just one word, Master. The air inside filled with soft, shifting script and a quiet recording. My voice from earlier, telling her about the way Magnus held a sword like it was already in love with him. The words curled like petals and settled. The rose breathed the story in and glowed a little brighter. The room went very still in the way rooms do when they are watching something honest. It keeps 10 moments, Stella said, voice small but steady. For when we want to remember, I'll make more domes. Alice's eyes shone. My father put a hand over his mouth. Reka's clipboard acquired a drop of water that absolutely wasn't a tear. 5 moms looked at their daughter like their hearts had found new rooms. I don't keep many prayers ready. I kept one then. Please let this girl have as many days like this as she can carry. The night thinned. People drifted home on hovercars and promises. Jean and Callie left with the Western courtesy that thanks you and threatens to buy the building if you don't invite them again. Elias stayed long enough to clean without being caught cleaning. Arya hugged me and made me promise to teach Marcus the pancake flip. Marcus promised to pay if it hit the ceiling. My parents kissed Stella goodnight twice. When the door finally shut and the house got quiet, Stella climbed onto the couch beside me, rested her head on my shoulder, and sighed like math after a perfect proof. Good birthday, I asked. The best, she said. Can we go to Mount Hua next week? We will, I said. We'll bring blue roses that look like quiet. And pancakes, she murmured, already drowsy. Obviously. I watched her fall asleep in pieces, the way kids do when they know they're safe, and thought about how power gets measured wrong. People count cities and wars. They should count rooms like this. 13 candles, 5 moms, too many snacks, and a glass dome full of a story worth telling twice. That felt like winning. Chapter 1006. Late Stars. The penthouse was quiet in that good, heavy way. City lights hummed past the glass. Blue roses on the balcony pretended not to listen. Stella slept curled on the couch under a blanket, breathing slow, a small galaxy of candle wax freckles still on her cheek from earlier. On the table, her glass dome glowed faintly around a single rose. One word held there like light in cupped hands. The elevator chimed. The ward recognized 2 signatures and let them through. Luna stepped in first, amethyst hair escaping a rushed braid, gold eyes bright and a little guilty. Tiamat followed in a dark coat, bringing in a pressure changed the way mountains bring weather. You're late, I said, keeping my voice low. Cake surrendered hours ago. That's a felony on this floor. Luna winced, then smiled. I'm sorry. She, a thumb at Tiamat, made me spar with a ridge. The ridge was arrogant, Tiamat said, closing the door with 2 fingers. It needed humility. And that takes time, Luna added quickly. I folded my arms. Do I need to call the Department of Geography? Luna bit her lip to stop a laugh. Tiamat lifted one eyebrow, which for her is a 12-paragraph memo. Then Luna looked at me properly, apology softening into warmth. She crossed the room and stopped close, glow brushing my shirt. You got stronger, she said very quietly. You really did it. High radiant, I admitted. Finally. Her arms slid around me with the kind of care that knows where the old bruises live. Congratulations, she murmured against my shoulder. I'm proud of you. My throat forgot how to be clever. I just held her back. When she pulled away, we stayed close. Foreheads touched once. The whole room narrowed to gold eyes, quick breath, the tilt of her mouth. Heat ran down my spine, clean and sudden. I leaned in. She did too. Daddy. Stella's voice arrived from the hallway, soft and drowsy. A small head peeked around the corner, blanket trailing like a comet. She blinked, saw Luna and Tiamat, and woke all the way. Mum Luna. Aunt Tia. Luna went very still. The word hit like a bell. She had been called many things by empires, kings, and a few gods who should have known better. This one almost took her knees. Mom? She echoed, breath-catching. Stella didn't notice the tremor. She ran full speed into Luna's arms. Luna caught her on instinct, and for a heartbeat she just held the girl, eyes wide, as if someone had put the sun in her hands and asked her to be careful. Yes, Luna managed, voice unsteady but sure by the last letter. Yes, Star. I'd like that very much. Tiamat endured her own smaller collision with the resigned patience of geology. She patted Stella's back once with a careful, clawless hand. You are heavier, she said approvingly. Good. You missed cake, Stella reported gravely. I accept judgment, Luna said, finding her laugh again. We brought gifts as apology. Tiamat set a long, slender box and a much smaller one on the table. She glanced at the rows under glass and inclined her head a fraction. Respect given, not borrowed. Sit, I said, waving them toward the couch. We'll smuggle you contraband cake in a minute. Stella clambered onto the cushions between us, blanket piled like armor. She tried to be formal for 3 seconds, failed, and bounced. Gifts! Luna reached into her coat and drew out a velvet pouch. She hesitated, one more look at me, like she was still hearing the word that had unmade and remade her, and then handed it over. Open mine first. Inside lay a thin pendant on a silk cord, an oval of pale crystal, a milk and gold shimmer sleeping deep within. A tiny Chilean scale, silver white, sat at the top like a crescent moon. It's called a quiet heart, Luna said. Pure light stitched to a memory thread. It doesn't make you stronger. It helps you remember how to breathe when everything is loud. Stella held it up. The crystal caught the room's glow and returned something softer. How does it work? She asked. You press once, Luna said, and count 4 in, 6 out. It hums to keep time. If you hold it to your chest and speak one word you want to keep, it tucks that feeling away for later. Just for you. That's perfect, Stella whispered. She looped it over her neck and touched the stone to her blanket where her heart hid. Quiet, she said. The pendant warmed and settled like it had just learned her name. Thank you, Mom Luna. Luna's eyes shone. She kissed Stella's hair and didn't trust her voice for a second. Tiamat nudged the long box forward. For the hand, she said, and the mind that rides it. Stella opened it and gasped. Inside lay a stylus and a slate, but neither looked ordinary. The stylus was bone pale with a strip of dark metal down its spine, balanced like a good blade. The slate was matte and cool, a soft gray that drank light. It writes on anything, Tiamat said. Paper, glass, air if theatrics are required. The slate shows what you meant to write, not what your fear scribbled. It steadies a line enough to be kind, not enough to lie. Stella lifted the stylus. It sat in her hand like it had been waiting there since morning. What is it made of? Old sky iron and a patient bone, Tiamat said. Both asked first. Stella nodded like that was the only correct answer. I'll take care of it. There is more, Tiamat added, pushing the tiny box forward. Inside sat a smooth pebble the color of early morning, a fine crack down its middle. A thinking stone, she said. 7th peak. For your pocket. It is good at listening. When you cannot choose, warm it and ask the mountain to be old for you. It will not decide, but it will make the wrong answer sound wrong sooner. Stella leaned in and hugged her. Tiamat's mouth twitched, her version of a smile. Thank you, Aunt Tia. You are welcome, Tiamat said. Do not chew the stylus. I'm 13, Stella said, scandalized. Humans regress under stress, Tiamat replied, utterly serious. I have seen things. Luna snorted. I failed to hide a grin. Did we miss anything else? Luna asked, recovering her mischief. Any surprise engagements while we were humbling geography? Arya taught Marcus the family handshake, I said. My father flipped a pancake with a party plate. Cecilia pretended to cry twice. Reka threatened the cake with a level. And Daddy gave me a ring that keeps a shoebox universe for experiments, Stella declared proudly, lifting pendant and ring like medals. Luna looked at me over Stella's head. Delighted. A shoebox universe. Practical. Adorable. I kept it small on purpose, I said. If she can crash a shoebox, we don't need a bigger one. Sound logic, Tiamat approved. Luna's gaze flicked to the dome. That's beautiful, she said. Will you show me how you did it tomorrow? It's simple, Stella began, already leaning forward. The frame keeps the air steady, and the light threads braid through the petals. And when you say a word that matters, the glass remembers the shape of the sound and, tomorrow, I cut in gently. Off-duty scientist hours now. She stuck out her tongue at me. Luna and Tiamat pretended shock. Hot chocolate, Stella tried, already sliding off the couch. It's late, I said. She clasped both hands in the oldest trick in the book. It is my birthday. Flawless argument, I said. Kitchen. We migrated. Tiamat took the whisk like it owed her rent and turned cream into clouds without looking. Luna raided the pantry and returned with marshmallows, then pretended she hadn't. Stella perched on a stool, pendant and ring glinting, stylus box close like a pet. You look happy, Luna told her. I am, Stella said. Everyone came. Everyone stayed. And now I have a stone that listens. Stones are underrated, Tiamat observed, pouring the first cup. They make good promises. I tasted the chocolate. It was unfairly perfect. You two could have warned me about the descent, I said after a beat, because I am genetically incapable of not poking dragons when within range. I had to improvise around a very rude tower. We felt it, Luna said, sober now. We kept the far edges quiet. You kept the center. You did well, Tiamat added. You lived. You learned. You did not break the city. Growth. High praise, I said. It is, she said simply. Stella sipped and sighed like a retired queen. We're going to Mount Hua next weekend, she announced. To bring flowers and tell stories. Daddy promised. Luna softened in the way she only does when the word story is nearby. I'll come if you want me to. Please, Stella said at once. Tiamat tilted her head. I will come if the mountain behaves. It will, I said. Or the Department of Geography will send me a fruit basket and a bill. Luna laughed, then leaned her shoulder against mine. The touch was easy and electric at once. If Stella hadn't been there, I would have collected the kiss waiting in the space between us. Luna felt the same thought pass. Her gold eyes flicked up, bright and a little daring. We carried the mugs back to the living room and watched the city's late lights drift. The dome glowed. The roses breathed. Stella set the stylus on the slate and wrote her name once, very small, like a promise. It writes what you meant, she said, pleased. Even when your hand is sleepy. It will still record your mistakes, Tiamat said. Do not become lazy because a tool is kind. I won't, Stella said, solemn. I'll practice being precise so it doesn't have to fix anything. Good, Tiamat said. Then we understand each other. Luna found my hand under the blanket and threaded her fingers through mine, surprised at herself and not pulling away. Happy birthday, Star, she whispered again to Stella. Best one, Stella murmured, sliding towards sleep for the second time. Thank you for coming, even if you were late. We'll be on time tomorrow, Luna promised. You will try, Tiamat amended. I looked at the two most dangerous beings I know being gentle in my living room and felt something unclench I hadn't noticed was tight. The tower was quiet. The horizon, for once, wasn't on fire. My daughter wore a pendant that breathed with her, held a stylus made from patience, and fell asleep in a pile of blanket and gifts and people who would move continents for her. Good night, I said. Good night, Luna echoed. Sleep, Tiamat ordered, which sounded like a threat and landed like care. We dimmed the lights. The dome kept its soft glow. The city exhaled. And for a while, the only thing that needed guarding was this room, and the small word that had made Luna's hands shake in the best way. Chapter 1007. The Space Between. The house settled into that late, lovely quiet where even the appliances try to whisper. Stella had drifted back to sleep on the couch, pendant warm against her chest, stylus tucked under her hand like a pet. The glass dome glowed faintly over its blue rose, holding one word and a lot of feeling. Luna sat beside me under the throw, shoulder to shoulder, sharing the same square of warmth. Tiamat stood by the window, gaze on the city the way a hawk looks at open sky, measuring, choosing not to leave. I will patrol the horizon, she said, which in dragon means, I am giving you the room. Don't bully any more ridges, I told her. If geography behaves, she said, and then folded space like it was a napkin. One step, a soft ripple, gone. No flash, no drama, just absence. I let out a breath I hadn't noticed I was holding. Luna's hand found mine under the blanket and didn't leave. She's gentler with you? Luna said, eyes on the dark glass. She is, I answered. It's strange. Since high radiant, the distance changed. Less pedestal, more person, still a mountain, just closer. You climbed, Luna said simply. Mountains respect that. We watched the hover lights drift. My ring warmed once, the shoebox universe inside ticking through its own little night, and then cooled. Do you remember? Luna asked. The first time you tried to use gray on something that was not remotely a door? Which time? I said. The vending machine? The submarine? The vampire shrine? She laughed, gold eyes bright. The vending machine. You looked so betrayed when it refused to become a corridor. Look, it ate my coins twice. You tried to open it into a grocery store. I was hungry. You are always hungry, she said, fond and merciless. For food, for fights, for problems big enough to matter. That last one is your fault, I said. You kept handing me bigger problems. Someone had to, she said. Left to your own devices, you would have collected stray cities. That's unfair, I said, then considered several maps. Mildly fair. Her laughter softened and stayed near. We fell into easy silence. The kind that comes after long wars and longer trains and the kind of days you want to live in twice. Do you remember the night market rooftop? I asked. Luna made a little sound that was all mischief. When you tried to impress me by balancing on the edge and pretending you weren't bleeding? I was not pretending. You were absolutely pretending. She tapped my ribs with a finger. You had 3 broken ones and a plan to fight a warlord with a broom. I maintain the broom would have worked, I said. It would have, because I would have held you together while you swung it, she said, and the truth of it lived in the quiet. We let memory walk through the room. The savage communion fortress breaking under a gray afternoon. The blue greenhouse where Rose said, Mom first, and my heart learned a new trick. The moon, silent and black, where a god tried on a crown and I took it away. Tiamat's training hall where pain was a price and growth was change given shape. Luna's pure light under my skin, knitting me back into a person when a fight tried to make me a story with a bad ending. You were the anchor, I said. When I shook, you didn't. Only on the outside, she said. Inside, I was a flock of birds, but I learned to teach them to fly in circles. It looked like calm. Sometimes it was. I leaned on it more than I should, I said. You leaned the right amount, she said. Otherwise, you would have fallen sideways. I don't like you sideways. We smiled at each other, a little helpless. Her glow brushed my wrist where the ring sat. The room smelled like chocolate and roses and clean glass. Beyond the window, Avalon pulsed like a living map. So, she said, tilting her head, eyes dancing. How does it feel to be the most kissable demigod in a 3-city radius? Only 3, I said. For if you stand on a chair. I snorted. When did you decide you were going to kiss me? I asked because if we were going to do this, we might as well admit we had always been doing this. Day 1, she said without shame. Then I met your heart, and I decided to wait until you grew into it. That's cheating, I said, throat a little tight. Using patience as a weapon. Patience is sharper than most knives, she said. Also, you were busy collecting fiancés like merit badges. I did not collect. She raised an eyebrow. I surrendered with a hand. I fell in love, I said, repeatedly, correctly. You did, she said, softening. And they fell back because you do that thing. What thing? Walk into rooms and mean it, she said. See people and keep seeing them even when it's inconvenient. You would be very annoying if you were not also very good. That's not why you love me, I said. No, she said. I love you because you are ridiculous and stubborn and you laugh at the wrong time and the right one. And because when the tower fell you went. And because when Stella said, Mom, my knees forgot their job. My eyes dropped to her hands. She looked down at them as if she, too, remembered the way they had trembled. I've been a lot of things, she went on. Contract, companion, healer, problem. Mom was not on my bingo card. She meant it, I said, all the way to the core. I know, she whispered. That's why it knocked me over. We sat with that. It was large. It rearranged furniture inside the chest. Do you ever resent it? I asked. The five, the schedules, the politics, the way we fit everything around a larger we. Sometimes I resent the calendar, she said dryly. And sometimes I resent the way your face looks when you are about to go somewhere I can't follow. But no, I chose this. I choose it every day. If I needed you alone, I would have had you years ago. I wanted you whole. That's generous, I said, because it was and because it made my eyes sting in a way dragons would mock. It's practical, she said. You at half is a waste. You at whole shakes mountains. I huffed a laugh. And rearranges the Department of Geography's inbox. Exactly, she said. We slid out from under the throw and walked to the balcony because the room felt suddenly smaller than the night. The blue roses breathed cool air. The city stretched to the horizon. The tower's scar was only a darker line now. The stars tried their best against Avalon's lights and lost politely. Luna leaned on the rail and looked up. I stood beside her and looked sideways, because looking directly at her when she was looking like that tended to end poorly for my dignity. Remember when you threatened to bite anyone who called me a pet? She said, amused. I will still bite them, I said. You have 5 fiancés, she said. They'll get there faster. I will cheer. She laughed, then went quiet, and the quiet did that thing where it turns into gravity. She turned toward me. I turned toward her. The simple geometry of it felt like a solution. Do you want to? She asked, as direct as sunrise. Yes, I said, honest as breath. We stood so close I could count the gold flecks in her eyes. She reached up and touched my face like it was a map she had memorized and was checking for new roads. My hand found the line of her jaw, warm and smooth, and then the back of her neck, where her braid had loosened into silk. Heat ran through me like a lit fuse. It wasn't the battlefield flare that makes you feel 10 feet tall. It was the kind that makes the world small enough to hold. Arthur, she said, and I have been called many names in many voices, but that one wound through every hard day and pulled gently. Luna, I answered, and her name fit behind my teeth like it had been waiting there. We leaned in, not rushed, not shy, simply meeting in the space we had been circling for years. The kiss landed soft at first, a promise wrapped in patience. Her mouth tasted like cocoa and something bright that was only Luna. She kissed like she healed, sure, steady, knowing where the hurt used to be and where it wasn't anymore. My hand slid to her waist. Her fingers curled in my shirt. The city kept humming, respectful. The roses held their breath. Somewhere behind us, Stella turned over and sighed in the exact key that makes a house feel like a home. We broke just enough to breathe and then laughed because we both had the same thought at the same time. Finally. That, she said, forehead resting against mine, was overdue. By years, I said. We were busy, she said. Saving continents, I said. Collecting moms, she added. And we both had to stop and grin. I kissed her again, deeper, because once was never going to be enough. She answered like someone who had kept the calendar open for this exact hour. Chapter 10:11. Quiet morning, loud heart. I woke before the city did. Blue light lay across the floor like water. The windows wore dawn thin and pale. The blue roses on the balcony faced east, a little smug about it. The penthouse smelled faintly of chocolate, clean glass, and him. Arthur slept beside me, one arm flung toward my side of the bed as if his body didn't trust me to stay. Hair a disaster, breathing slow, the kind of peaceful face that makes you forgive a man for regularly inviting Apocalypse to dinner as a guest of honor. Last night hit me all at once and I had to bury my face in the pillow because my cheeks were absolutely, definitively on fire. I slipped from bed. He made a small unhappy sound and rolled into the heat I left like a cat. I tucked the blanket around his shoulders, stood there for 3 seconds looking ridiculous and full, then escaped before I embarrassed myself further. The living room still held last night's shape. The banner had slouched into the dignified slump of a party well done. The glass dome on the table glowed faintly around Rose's blossom. The word we braided into the glass, Master, breathed slow and soft. One of Stella's notebooks lay face down on the rug with a pencil through the spiral like a flag. The shoebox universe ring sat obediently in a sunstripe, pretending innocence. I set water to boil. I am not an expert in mortal coffee, but I am very good at kettles and the illusion of patience. While it hummed, I touched my own throat and felt the echo of last night's warmth. I thought of the first time he took my hand as if it were the most natural thing in the world, then of the way he touched me later like he'd been learning a language for years and finally dared to speak. Yes, blushing again. Dragons would mock me. I accept it. Mom Luna. I turned. Stella padded in from the hallway, a constellation hoodie swallowing her shoulders, hair attempting a coup against gravity, eyes soft with sleep and bright with everything else. The word landed and my heart did that bell thing again. I've been called many names by empires and kings and a few gods who should have known better. Mom is the only one that almost takes my knees. Good morning, Star, I said, opening my arms. She walked straight into the hug like it was the front door of the day. Children radiate heat the way small suns do. I inhaled the shampoo she pretends she didn't borrow from me and decided the world could be forgiven for a lot. You're up early, I said into her hair. I wanted to see my pendant in morning light, she said, pulling back to show me. The quiet heart caught dawn and gave it back gentler. Also, I had a dream that my stylus was writing on air and the letters were math cats. Math cats? I repeated, properly horrified. Did they purr in prime numbers? She lit up. Yes. The kettle clicked. I poured, and the kitchen rewarded us with a smell that should require a license. I passed Stella hot chocolate and took a cautious sip of coffee. It behaved itself. Thank you for the gifts, she said, feet swinging against the cabinet. The stone is already listening. I asked it if I should have cereal or pancakes, and it said, not cereal. That stone has taste, I said. She tilted her head at me. Are you staying today? I am, I said. If you'll have me. Obviously, she said, and the room got lighter. We stood in comfortable quiet and watched the floor change color as dawn moved in. The pendant pulsed, 4 in, 6 out, and without meaning to I matched it. She noticed because of course she did. You needed one too, she said softly. I did, I admitted. Last night was a lot. Her eyes turned very wise and very mischievous at the same time. Did you and Daddy? She left the sentence hanging like a cliff with a sign that says, confess here. We slept, I said, absolutely composed, which is a lie everyone in the room could hear, including the plants. Stella squealed so quietly it registered only to bats. Finally. Oh no, I said. Has there been a betting pool? She tried not to smile and failed. Maybe. I will find the bookie and donate them to a worthy cause. Please refrain from telling your 5 moms for at least 10 minutes, I said. No promises, she sang, then softened. You look happy. I am, I said. He makes it easy. We migrated to the couch with our mugs. She set her stylus on Tiamat's slate and wrote her name once, small and clean, like a secret she was telling herself first. The line came out steady. Kind, not lying, the tool was doing its job and so was she. Tell me something about Daddy from before I knew him, she said, curling into my side like a cat. He was smaller, I said. He's still tall, she said, offended on his behalf. Inside, I said. He was carrying too much and pretending it was fine. He tried to fix everything alone because asking felt wrong. He learned to ask. He's better at it now. She nodded like she'd been waiting for that sentence to exist out loud. He asks me for help too, she offered proudly. Like with the SIM tablet. And I remind him to eat. And I tell him to stop being dramatic about paperwork. You are indispensable, I said. She sipped and swung her feet. Do you think he'll be okay when Alisara comes back? We don't pretend in this house. He'll be ready, I said. And he won't be alone. That's the part she never understands. Stella considered that. I don't like her, she said. But I feel sad for her sometimes. That's because your heart works, I said. Keep it that way. Footsteps behind us. The soft weight of someone who can move like a ghost when he wants to. We turned. Arthur stopped at the edge of the couch, sleep ruffled and devastating, the way that should be illegal before breakfast. He took us in mugs, pendant, slate, me, Stella, and the last of the night left his face. Morning, he said, voice low with sleep. He leaned down and wrapped his arms around me from behind with that claiming gentleness he thinks he hides. My shoulder fit under his jaw like it had been designed by someone with taste. He smelled like warm skin and the good kind of tired. He reached out and ruffled Stella's hair into new geography. She squeaked and leaned into his hand anyway. Morning, Daddy, she said. Mom Luna says my stone has taste. It does, he said gravely. Stones generally do. People are iffier. He kissed the top of my head without making a fuss about it, which made it worse in the best way. My face, traitor, did the blush thing again. He felt it and smiled into my hair in a way that should require a permit. He slid onto the couch, one arm still around me, his other hand finding Stella's and giving it a quick squeeze. The city finished waking. Hovercars hummed, light climbed the roses. The glass dome caught it and made it gentle. I looked at them and felt something old and tired inside me sit down and rest. People use the word salvation like it's a crown. It isn't. It's a room where you are exactly what you are and someone is glad about it. Julius gave me a road. Tiamat gave me steel. Arthur gave me a door with my name on it. Pancakes, he said. Obviously, Stella and I said together. He laughed, stood, and went to negotiate with a pan. I stayed where I was, leaning into the place he had left warm, listening to the small household noises I have learned to love. Batter meeting griddle, a child humming, a man who tilts the universe back toward right one breakfast at a time. Best morning, Stella said, pendant warm against my arm. Agreed, I said. Arthur returned with the first plate and set it down, then bent to hug me from behind again, because apparently that is a habit now, and patted Stella's head for good measure. The world outside our windows could wait. For these few minutes, this was the whole map. His arms, her grin, my ridiculous heart, and a stack of pancakes trying their best. Chapter 10-12, Marshall King's Manual. By the time Reika's key slid into the penthouse lock, the city had climbed fully into day. Sunlight rolled off the high-rises like slow water. The hover lanes sang a thin, constant thread under the glass. The scent of pancakes still lingered in our kitchen, the kind of domestic evidence that makes a house feel more like an argument you've already won. The door clicked. Reika stepped in with her usual quiet economy. Shoes lined perfectly, coat folded once over her arm, tablet tucked under her elbow. Violet hair pinned back, violet eyes taking the room's temperature in a second. She looked at the banner slouched on the wall, the blue roses gathering light, the two mugs on the table. She looked at me. Welcome home, I said. Master, she replied, and the formality warmed rather than cooled the space between us. Her gaze softened, a small smile tilting. You look rested. I am, I said, and let that be enough explanation for now. She set the tablet on the counter and reached into her satchel, drawing out a book wrapped in cloth dark as night water. My chest tightened a fraction. I knew that shape in my bones. The Marshall King's Sword Manual. I had given it to her years ago with the honest line that it held everything my master thought I might need later. Back then, I could read the surface and sense the rest, like a song I almost knew. Since the breakthrough, something had changed. Sword Accord had settled under my skin like an old friend finally arriving by the right road. Reika placed the manual gently on the dining table. I finished the last sequence, she said. I can feel where it points next, but not how to step there without breaking the chain. You mentioned new notes. I pulled the chair out for her. She sat, back straight, hands folded on the cloth. I unwrapped the book and felt the memory of my master's hand in the binding, the way he tied thread and thought together so they couldn't come apart by accident. When I opened to the center spread, the ink breathed. Not an illusion, more like condensation on cold glass. Stroke by stroke, faint silver lines rose out of the page, too fine to be ordinary ink, too steady to be accident. The margins filled with small arrows, the kind you miss if your eyes are hungry for spectacle. Between major forms, ghosted diagrams bloomed, showing hips and shoulders out of step, a rib cage holding tension like an unpaid bill. Rekha leaned in. "I couldn't see that before," she whispered. "I couldn't either," I said. "Not until a chord." The silver notes weren't instructions so much as posture corrections written for a future student. My master had hidden them under what any talented swordsman could use, sealing the real voice behind a door only this level could open. I traced a finger above the page, not touching, letting the lines tell me where Rekha's road bent wrong. "Here," I said, tapping a tiny curve in the margin. "Your left hip rushes the right shoulder by half a count when you transition from quiet guard to advance. It worked at your current ceiling because your power paid the bill. It won't anymore." She nodded once, eyes on the mark. "I feel that seam. The blade gets there on time, but my center arrives late." "You're strong enough now that delays show," I said. "This sequence stitches it. It'll feel slower." "It isn't." I folded the page back and the notes followed like light underwater. Another spread, another low breath from the hidden layer. Small text nodded next to a sketch of a knee and an ankle. "Wait until the floor finishes speaking. Don't answer a question you didn't hear." "I love him," I said, not realizing I'd spoken aloud until Rekha's mouth tilted. "He was your master," she said, and it carried no envy. "Still is a little," I admitted. "He did this for me and for you, for anyone stubborn enough to climb." The kettle started without me touching it. Luna's pure light had a way of remembering what comfort looked like. I poured tea and set a cup near Rekha's right hand. She wrapped her fingers around it, not to drink but to anchor. "Try this," I said, sliding the manual and tapping a 3-beat loop, written so small I had to lean to read it. "Half kneel. The foot doesn't search. The blade doesn't announce. Breath leads the heel." Rekha stood, moved the chair without a scrape, and took her place on the living room mats. She settled and drew an invisible blade first, the way we do when the brain needs to learn before the body swings. Then she lifted the real thing. Her first pass was clean and wrong in exactly the way the margin warned. The second pass corrected for the warning and overcorrected. The third pass found the count. She repeated until the room's rhythm accepted it. On the 10th pass, the cut lived in her legs instead of her shoulders. The air made a sound that is not sound, the one that says, "That is the seam." She lowered the blade. "There it is," she said simply. "Again," I said, "we don't clap for the seam. We fold it in until it's just how your body talks." She worked while I turned pages. Silver constellations dusted margins. Small arrows pointed left, then not left, then center. Notes to myself from a man who knew me better than I did when I was 19. Notes for Rekha from a man who never met her but trusted my taste. I circled 3 clusters with a soft pencil. One at the shoulder girdle, one at the knee, one near the back of her neck. "These will matter after the gates," I said. "They're invisible until you pass them. When you do, these will stop you from paying with joints." She returned, cheeks faintly colored, sweat beading at her temple. She looked at the circles and then at me. "You saw them." "I see them now," I said. "I'll copy the pattern for you. When you cross, it will open." A small silence folded between us. Rekha's gaze held my face the way she studies a form. No rush, no flinch. She smelled the room. Tea, roses, the last echo of last night that even a careful shower can't erase. "You and Lady Luna," she said gently. I held her eyes. Yes, a breath, not a test, not a flinch, just a breath that had room for humanity. "I am happy," she said. "I am also human." "I know," I said. She reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. Not claiming, not comparing. Something simpler, acknowledgement that we are building a life with many rooms, and that her room has a lock only she owns. You never make me small, she said, even when your world is large. That won't change, I said. She squeezed once, then let go and sat back, the line of her shoulders easing. Good. Then I will make dinner later, she said, because Rekha's love is sharp and domestic, and I will train after. I want to reach the gates before the year turns. You will, I said. You're close. She smiled without showing teeth, the way she does when praise lands in a place she doesn't like to leave empty. Tell me more, she said, and meant the manual. We went back to the pages. I marked 3 drills with pencil dots, a private shorthand from the old days. Do this tired, do this fresh, do this until you want to throw it out the window and then keep going. She copied them onto a pad in her neat block script. I added 2 small notes of my own in the margin. Gray thin, barely there, so the book would whisper to her when a chord finally unlocked it. Your bottleneck isn't power, I said. It's patience. You want to spend what you've saved. Save it longer. Let the floor finish its sentence before you answer. She exhaled, smiling because I'd stolen her line. That is almost rude, she said. It is, I said. And it works. We took a break because bodies remember better when you let them. I topped her tea. The city's hum pressed into the glass and stayed polite. From Stella's room came the faint scratch of a stylus and then her laugh at something only she could see. Luna's pendant hummed from the side table. 4 in, 6 out. Like it approved of how air should be used. Rekha looked toward the sound and softened. She is happy, she said. She is, I said. Because of you, most days. Because of us, Rekha corrected, then added. And a very stubborn father. Guilty, I said. She smiled again, then returned to the book, turning a page with the kind of care you give to holy things. Your master left you this knowing you would share it. He taught me with that assumption, I said, that I would not hoard. You don't, she said simply. Then, thank you. You're mine, I said, as if that explained anything and everything. It does, she said. We worked another hour, short sequences joined to shorter ones until they felt like single breath. I watched her chain improve in increments only a boring person could love, and loved them. When she finally stepped back and bowed to the blade, the room felt cleaner, like we had swept it without brooms. I closed the manual and rewrapped it in its dark cloth. When I tied the knot, a thin ripple of silver ink pulsed once through the cover and vanished. A chord acknowledging a chord. A door locking after being catalogued. I slid the bundle toward her. 3 drills, I said. 2 weeks. No new forms. Make these live in your legs first. Yes, master, she said, and the word didn't put me above her. It reminded both of us I stand beside her job. She stood, and on a gentle impulse I reached for her. She came into my arms like the decision had been there already. Press of violet hair under my chin. Steady heartbeat against mine. No heat, no rush. Just the warmth of a person you trust to carry their own weight and still let you help with the corners. When we stepped apart, her eyes were bright and steady. I will put on rice, she said, tone back to business. You will shower. Is that a hint? I asked. It is a fact, she said, which is Rekha for yes. She took the manual and moved toward the kitchen. I watched her go and felt grateful in the old, heavy way. Not fireworks, not trumpets. The feeling you get when a bridge holds underfoot and you can keep walking without looking down. I headed for the hall and paused at Stella's door. She looked up from her tablet, grin immediate. Daddy, the math cats learned integrals. Terrifying, I said. Save them 1 pancake. I will if they pass the test, she said, deadly serious. Fair, I said, and ruffled her hair. In the mirror by the bathroom I caught my own reflection. The calmer weight in my shoulders, the thinner, quieter line in my gaze since accords settled. I thought of my master, of the silver notes we woke together, of Rekha's patient climb, of Luna's blush and new habit of stealing my side of the bed, of Stella's pendant breathing with the room. The house felt like a page with good margins. I turned on the water and let the noise of it fill the spaces that thinking doesn't need. When I stepped back into the hall, Reika was already at the stove, rice soaking in a clay pot, vegetables lined military neat on a board, knife flashing with the kind of economy that wins small wars. She glanced over her shoulder once, read something in my face, and nodded like we had agreed on a plan no one else needed to see. "Welcome home," I said again, quieter. "I am," she answered, and the word fit. Chapter 10:13, Missing Color. The penthouse was quiet by late morning, having settled into a comfortable, lived-in rhythm. Sunlight, crisp and golden in the autumn air of Madison, streamed through the vast, floor-to-ceiling windows, turning the floating dust motes into a swirling galaxy. Below, the city's hover lanes murmured, a constant, soothing hum that was the heartbeat of a world in motion. On the gleaming stainless steel face of the stove, a sticky note was affixed like a formal decree. Reika's elegant, precise script was unmistakable. Lunch at 1300 hours. Do not snack. R. At the expansive dining table, Stella was queen in her self-proclaimed kingdom of creation. She had colonized the polished oak surface, transforming it into a vibrant workshop of scattered schematics, finely sharpened pencils, and stacks of technical printouts. At 13, she possessed a formidable, almost unnerving focus. She was swimming in one of my old UW-Madison hoodies, the dark gray fabric emblazoned with a faded crest. Its sleeves rolled messily past her elbows. Her dark hair, a restless cascade of waves, was barely contained by two struggling clips. She was hunched over a diagram, her brow furrowed as she scribbled a line of tensor calculus in the margin with a practiced ease that still made me proud. Luna sat nearby, curled gracefully into a plush armchair, watching Stella's diligent work with the quiet, absorbed intensity of a cat observing a fascinating sunbeam. I stood at the kitchen counter, my hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had long since gone lukewarm, the familiar ache of a father's worry settling deep behind my ribs. On Stella's tablet, the admissions page for the Mythos City Institute hovered in its signature, hopeful pale blue. She swiped, and the seal of the Tower of Magic appeared, then the Alchemical Collective. They all made the same glossy, seductive promises of knowledge and discovery. And on every single page, tucked neatly into the digital forms and lists of prerequisites, was the same unyielding, impassable barrier mana affinity certification required for all lab-based programs. "Daddy?" Stella asked, her voice pulling me from my thoughts. She didn't look up from a particularly nasty integral she was solving. "Is it true the Institute gives first year's lab time now? Like, actual hands-on work?" "It is," I confirmed, my voice sounding steadier than I felt. "They started that policy a couple of years ago. Smaller groups, more direct supervision from senior faculty, better safety protocols. Could a student work in those labs without mana?" The question was delivered with practiced casualness, but the pencil in her hand had gone utterly still. Luna and I shared a look across the room. Her expression was a complex tapestry of empathy and concern. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head, a silent signal that this was my conversation to navigate. "They don't have a framework for that, Stell," I said as gently as I could. "The interlocks, the diagnostic tools, even the emergency suppression systems are all hardwired to a user's mana channels." Was all she said in response. She tapped the pencil twice, a sharp little rhythm of frustration, before returning to her equation. The single sound was enough. The memory rose unbidden, not as a hazy recollection, but as a sharp, visceral plunge into the past. I wasn't in the sunlit penthouse anymore. I was standing on the cold, debris-strewn floor of a ruined sanctuary, the air thick with the smell of ozone, dust, and spilled blood. I remembered the chilling silence after the battle, the impossible stillness of a world I had just broken and remade. I saw Stella, so much smaller then, her small body trembling in Reika's protective embrace. The memory of my own relief was a physical force, so profound it had buckled my knees. I had knelt to hug her, to reassure myself she was real and safe. And then the terrifying, sublime, and utterly uncontrollable surge of power. The gray. It had moved through me not as a tool, but as a sentient, silver fire with its own alien intelligence, pouring from my being into her fragile form. I remembered my own silent, desperate scream of "No, stop!" trying to pull it back, to command it, but I was merely a conduit. I was a horrified passenger in my own body, watching as the dark, parasitic threads of the artificial, heavenly demon power were ripped from her very essence, strand by shimmering, screaming strand. I remembered the words of the goddess Akasha echoing in the void that followed. Your daughter needs her father, not a god drunk on cosmic power. My hand tightened on the ceramic mug, my knuckles white. Luna was beside me in an instant, her warm hand covering mine, her touch a firm, grounding anchor in the turbulent storm of the memory. She's here, Arthur. She's safe, she murmured, her voice a low, steady anchor against the pull of the past. Across the room, Rekha paused in her preparations, her gaze meeting mine. It was filled with a shared, painful understanding. She had been there. She had seen the raw, untamed power, and the terror on my face when I realized I couldn't control it. When I saved you, I started, my voice rougher than I intended. The power I had to use, its nature was to unmake things that were artificial, wrong. It had to destroy the demonic essence they had woven into you. I took a shaky breath. That poison would have twisted you into something else or killed you. But the gray wasn't a scalpel. It was a flood. It washed away the poison, but it took your mana with it. I couldn't control that part of it. It was the cost of saving your life. Stella finally looked up from her work, her dark eyes clear, deep, and unervingly perceptive. She carefully placed her pencil on the table, giving the conversation the full weight of her attention. I know, she said, her voice soft but sure. I found your personal logs about it last year. The entry from that night. I nodded, my throat tight. Rekha's idea unfiltered truth when she was ready. I'm not mad, she said, cutting off the torrent of apologies and explanations she saw forming on my face. I'm alive. I like being alive. She wrinkled her nose. And frankly, having a parasitic demonic engine fused to my soul sounds really, really gross. The immense tension in my shoulders eased, a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying. Luna's thumb stroked the back of my hand in a slow, soothing rhythm. But, Stella added, a strategist's glint in her eye that was pure Luna. I want access to the labs. I want to build things. I don't want to be told no, because a fundamental part of me is missing. You want the world to meet you where you are? Luna finished for her, a proud smile touching her lips. Yes, Stella said, her voice suddenly smaller. Is that too much to ask? Rekha's timer beeped, a cheerful sound that cut through the heavy atmosphere. She emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray with 3 steaming, fragrant bowls. Her movements were always a model of quiet efficiency, but her eyes were soft as she set a bowl in front of me, her fingers brushing my arm in a fleeting, supportive touch. Food first, she said, her tone gentle but absolute. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an act of care. We ate in silence for a few moments. The hearty, honest stew a comforting presence that grounded the room. What if you don't want mana? Luna asked Stella thoughtfully. Not for the labs, just for you. Do you ever miss it? Stella tilted her head, genuinely considering it. I don't know. I don't remember it, really. Sometimes I see other kids making light sparks and think it's pretty. But the idea of it feels a little boring compared to solving a problem, to building something real that works. I like making things. When the gray took your mana, I said, my gaze drifting to the city skyline beyond the window. It took more than just a power source. In this world, it's a key, a form of citizenship, a reason for people to listen. I know it stole that from you, too. Stella reached across the table and laid her hand on my arm. Her fingers were long and deft, the hands of an engineer. You didn't steal anything, she said, her voice firm. A power you couldn't control saved me from a bomb in my soul. It's okay to be sad about the key and still be glad the bomb is gone. Her simple, profound wisdom was a physical blow. It was everything I needed to hear. "Let me show you," she said, her mood shifting as she pulled her tablet closer. She swiped away the admissions page with a flick of her finger, revealing a beautifully complex schematic. It was a bracelet, but the centerpiece was a sophisticated coupler with two clearly marked ports. M, mana, and K, kinetic. Mana acts as both a power source and an instruction set, she explained, her voice gaining the excited energy she got when she was explaining a concept she loved. It expects a specific call and response, a cryptographic handshake from any device it interfaces with. My interpreter fakes the handshake. It converts raw kinetic input, like from this hand crank, she pointed to a detailed note in the margin, into a signal the device recognizes as a valid, mana-based instruction. "What about signal latency?" I asked, engaging with her on her level. "A faked handshake must have a delay. High-end equipment would time out." A brilliant, confident smile lit up her face. "The prototype does by about 12 milliseconds. But I'm modeling a recursive algorithm to anticipate the device's query patterns based on its function. It learns to answer the question before it's asked. It just needs a more stable substrate." She sighed. "Prototype 3 still melts, but it hums first." "Progress," Reika noted from her seat, a rare, genuine smile gracing her lips. "Can I use the lab here to print the next board?" Stella asked me. "The one with the stabilized substrate. I'll be careful." "Yes," I said instantly, the word leaving me before I'd even fully processed it. "Of course, I'll monitor everything." Later that afternoon, the scent of hot metal and flux filled a corner of the living room. We had the soldering kit out on its protective mat, working together under the focused glow of a magnifier lamp. There was a comfortable rhythm to it, a shared, silent focus that I cherished. "Do you ever wish you could put it back?" she asked suddenly, her voice quiet, her eyes fixed on the delicate circuit board in front of her. I paused, the tip of the soldering iron hovering over a tiny silver connection. I took a breath and gave her the most honest answer I had. "I wish you never had that poison in you to begin with," I said. "I wish, with all my heart, that I'd had the control to save you without that cost. To be a surgeon instead of a tidal wave." I met her eyes. "But I don't wish for your mana back, Stell. I wish for your happiness, your safety, and for you to have the tools to build whatever you can imagine. I will fight any rule, any academy, or any person that gets in the way of that." I watched her absorb the words. Her shoulders, which had been tense, relaxed by a fraction. She gave a single, firm nod. "Okay." Under the table, out of her sight, Luna's hand found mine. Reika, anticipating the moment, set a glass of cool water by my elbow without a word. A few minutes later, the new board was finished. Stella connected the interpreter to her small hand crank generator. She turned the crank, her expression a mixture of hope and intense concentration. A low, clear hum filled the sunny room, the steady, beautiful sound of a problem being solved. Her face broke into a triumphant, incandescent smile. "See?" she whispered, more to the device than to us. "It still works. We can still talk." We all watched her, this incredible 13-year-old girl who, when faced with a locked door the world had built, simply decided to engineer her own key. And in that quiet, humming moment, I learned again how to let go of the past I couldn't control, and just stand still to watch her build the future. Chapter 1014, Blue Between. Lyra appeared on the balcony so quietly it felt like she'd been there all along, the way the morning finds the city. She landed without a sound. Her boots touched the stone, and the air seemed to settle around her. She had exchanged her formal silks for a slate-gray jacket and simple trousers, but nothing could make her look ordinary. The low sun outlined her in a soft glow. "Arthur," she said, the corners of her mouth lifting just slightly. "You look heavier." "I'll take that as a compliment," I said. "You look like you've stopped fighting the city." "I have," she said. "For the most part. Elevators and I have agreed to a truce. We stood side by side for a moment, looking over the sprawling city of Avalon. Hover lanes wove like glowing braids above the river. Gardens hung like green bridges between the skyscrapers. Far in the distance, the spot where the tower once stood was just a blur in the hazy sky. Lyra's gaze swept from the street to the skyline and back down, a habit of those who come from the sky and measure the world in height and distance. "You passed the gates," she stated. It wasn't a question. I nodded. "You feel grounded. The wind doesn't push you around anymore," she added, almost to herself. "You push back. You're not exactly easy to read either," I said. "Your movements are silent unless I'm specifically looking for them." Her eyes warmed a little, which was Lyra's version of a smile. "I learned the crosswinds. Your world makes them differently." "How is the city treating you?" I asked. She took a slow breath, and the air smelled of distant rain. "It is loud, but I'm finding patterns in the noise. Your people organize their days in neat sections. Lights tell the vehicles when to move and when to stop. I enjoy the bridges at night. And tea. Tea is a wonderful invention." "Reika would be happy to hear you say that," I said. Lyra's eyes scanned the apartment behind me, taking in the comfortable clutter of the living room. Schematics were spread across the table. 2 coffee mugs sat on the balcony rail. A stray coil of wire was tangled in a houseplant. "Stella? She's trying to build a motor out of pure mathematics," I said. "No mana involved." That small lift of her mouth appeared again. "I brought her sweets from the East Market. The vendor claimed they were made with star glass. I don't believe her. They just taste like sugar." "She'll analyze them to be sure," I said. We fell into a comfortable silence. The last time we had spoken, a tower had loomed on the horizon, and the future was a sky full of questions. Months had passed. The world hadn't ended. Alisara had promised to return in 2 years. It wasn't peace, but it was a promise we could hold on to. Lyra turned to face me directly, her posture losing some of its formal stiffness. "You are at least as strong as I am now," she said, stating it as a fact. "Perhaps stronger. I would be insulted if I wasn't so proud." "I'll try not to flex at the dinner table," I promised. She ignored my joke. "You did it without breaking yourself," she said. "I was worried." "So was I admitted. Being careful was a new experience. I highly recommend it." A bit of tension left her shoulders. The atmosphere between us felt easier, lighter. "How long have you been back in Avalon?" I asked. 3 months, she said. "I signed the documents the Empire required. I learned your traffic laws. I stopped trying to barter for fruit with songs. I found a rooftop where the wind feels a little like home." "Do you like it here?" I asked. "I like that it exists," she said. "And I like that you are in it." We let the quiet truth of that statement hang in the air. She rested her hands on the stone railing, her fingers long and steady, pale scars on her knuckles, the only visible sign of her intense training, caught the light. Her eyes shifted to a patch of empty sky. "My brother would have liked your city," she said. And there it was, the real reason for her visit. "He would have loved the bridges," I said. "He always liked a good engineering problem." Her mouth twitched, a flicker of surprise that I'd remembered. "He did. He also liked to ask questions that derailed conversations. He couldn't have a bowl of soup without explaining fluid dynamics." "Stella would have adopted him on the spot," I said. Lyra made a soft sound, almost a laugh, but it faded into silence. "You've been looking for him," I said gently. "Yes." She watched a gull circle lazily above the river. The corridor maps show his ship vanished from the charts during a storm. But the storm wasn't where it was supposed to be. It was in 3 places at once, and then it just ceased to exist. "A transit fold that collapsed," I said. "Yes," she said. "The kind of event that makes our elders speak in riddles before falling silent." "Show me what you have," I said. She went very still, a reaction that for Lyra was like a flinch. "I have already asked too much of you." "No, you haven't," I said. You asked me to stand with you when you needed it. That's not a small thing. Her jaw tightened for a moment. She let out a strained breath I recognized, the same sound I'd heard on mountaintops and in war rooms. All right. She took a thin, silver disc from her jacket, its surface etched with the spiraling script of her people. She placed it on the railing. It hummed to life, projecting a map of glowing lines into the air between us. It was a map of her world's pathways, routes between places that didn't touch ours. Lyra pointed to a spot where 3 lines intersected and a 4th seemed to waver. Here, she said. This is where we lost him. I leaned closer. I let the gray surface, a feeling like static in the air, a shift in how I saw things. I didn't force it. I just looked. The junction felt wrong. Not broken, but stitched together. It was a seam that pretended to be a straight line until you got close. Then it showed its curve. I reached out, my fingers hovering over the glowing lines. You've only looked at this from above at high speed. Let me look at it from the side. Does your gray listen? She asked. It does, I said. When I'm quiet enough. She waited. I focused. The seam had a story. The travel corridor had been stable, and then something had pushed it from a direction no one would expect. It wasn't a random event. Someone or something had deliberately poked at the route. The corridor had buckled for just a moment. Some things fell through, others didn't. It wasn't a storm, I said. It was a prank with teeth. Her fingers tightened on the rail, so hard I heard the stone creak. A demon? Not one of the lust courts, I said. And it doesn't feel like the abyss. The pressure is wrong. This feels like a human with a tool they didn't understand, who didn't care about the consequences. Her expression hardened. The air around her grew still. A mage? Possibly, I said. Or a device they should never have built. She was silent for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was raw. I told him I would only be gone for a season, an envoy's duties. I left him songs, maps, the key to the old gate, and our father's wing ring. I didn't leave him away to call me for help from a storm I promised could never happen. You also left him a sister who never stopped looking, I said. She gave her head a single, sharp shake. We are taught to stand strong like towers, she said quietly. But we are also taught to recognize when a tower is the wrong shape for the storm. Sometimes I forget the second lesson. A fairy horn blew on the river below, a cheerful sound that knew nothing of the decade of guilt being held in check on a balcony high above. I'll help, I said. No grand gestures. I'll lay my harmony over that junction and see if the seam reveals a direction. I'll set the gray at the edges and listen for echoes. And I'll have Erebus on standby to catch anything that tries to crawl out. Lyra looked at me, as if searching for the hidden cost. I have little to offer in return. You have tea, I said, and you're learning to like my city. That's enough. She blinked, first at me, then out at Avalon. You are a very strange man, she concluded. I've been told, I said. She picked up the silver disc and put it away. Her hands were steady now, though her expression was not. Thank you, she said. We don't know if we'll find him, I cautioned. But it's better than not looking. A glimmer of moisture appeared in Lyra's eyes. Yes. I changed the subject. How are the 7 managing without their best envoy? They are writing longer letters, she said, and sending junior envoys who are far too fond of comfortable chairs. A tragedy, I deadpanned. Indeed, she agreed, though your empress handles ceremonies well. She says all the right words and appears to mean at least half of them, which is more than I can say for most leaders. I'll be sure to tell her the edited version of that compliment, I said. Her gaze drifted back into the apartment, to where Luna's mug sat beside a soldering iron. You and the Chelan, she said. Yes, I said. It suits you, she said simply. I am glad. Me too, I said. Stella calls her mom now, often with more enthusiasm than Luna is prepared for. A real smile touched Lyra's lips. Your family continues to grow. It just keeps saying yes, I replied. We stood there for another minute, watching the city pulse with life. A courier on a hoverbike zipped between buildings like a dragonfly. Across the way, a child on another balcony practiced with a long ribbon. A dog barked at a delivery drone until it flew away. Lyra turned to me. "I will bring you the complete mission logs," she said. "Maps, timelines, names. I can bring the wing ring, if you need it sent for your gray." "Let's start without the scent," I said, trying to keep a straight face. "But bring the rest." She nodded. Then she hesitated, something I had rarely seen her do. "I used to believe that asking for help was a failure of duty," she said. "Now, I think my duty is to the goal, not to my own pride. Is that correct?" "It's the version that lets me sleep at night," I said. She let out a soft breath, and one last knot of tension seemed to undo itself. "Good. Stay for tea?" I asked. She tilted her head. "Yes, and I will give Stella the star glass that is actually sugar." We went inside. The apartment seemed to welcome her presence. Stella looked up from her work, and her face lit up with a joy that filled the entire room. "Lyra," she yelled, "do you know anything about motors that can be tuned to hum specific notes?" "I know about winds that sing," Lyra replied, producing the box of sweets with a flourish. "We can compare." As they launched into a happy debate, I caught Lyra's eye. She gave me a single, grateful nod. I returned it. Outside, the city of Avalon carried on. Inside, my home was filled with the sound of people talking about small things that held up the weight of much larger ones. Far away, a seam in the world was waiting. We would go look. Not to save the world, but because a sister had asked and I had the ability to help. For now, that was enough. Chapter 10:15. The Unmoving Wall. The air in Tiamat's lair tasted of salt and ancient stone, warmed by the deep, patient heat of the earth. She watched me, her massive head tilted, her crimson eyes glowing like embers in the dim light of the cavern. The scales around them were like polished obsidian, each one the size of a shield. "Are you trying to kill me?" she asked. Her voice was perfectly calm, a low rumble that echoed slightly off the vaulted stone ceiling. I blinked, the question so far from my intentions that it took a moment to register. "What?" "I know my training methods were harsh," she continued, her tone as dry as dust. "But they worked, did they not? So I must ask why you are now attempting to end my life." "I'm not trying to kill you," I said, holding my hands up in a gesture of peace. Far away, a quiet anchor in my mind, I could feel the faint, steady warmth of Luna's bond. "Aren't you?" Tiamat tilted her head the other way, a motion that shifted shadows the size of buildings. "Then why did you ask to train together?" "To get stronger," I answered. It was the simple truth. After passing the gates in the tower, I had settled into the high radiant rank. Sword Accord was no longer a fleeting miracle but a state I could access. A quiet agreement between my blade and the world. My power felt different, cleaner, sharper, heavier. I needed to reshape my fighting style to match the man I was now, not the boy I had been just weeks ago. Tiamat let out a long, slow sigh, a sound like stone grinding on stone, and turned her massive head away. The light of her lair slid across the ancient, faded banners that hung from the cavern walls, telling stories of forgotten wars and fallen empires. When she looked back at me, her expression was profoundly serious. "Arthur, the nature of your power has changed," she said, her voice gentle but absolute. "A spar between us is no longer a lesson. It is a gamble with my life. In my current state, I cannot safely contain you." I started to protest, the words forming out of habit. "That's not true." "It is," she interrupted, her gaze unwavering. "As you are right now, one mistake from you, one uncontrolled surge of the accord you found, and I would be a smear on the floor of my own home. If you truly push yourself the way you need to, if you reach for the next level of your art, you will either kill me by accident or tear a hole in me that would take a century to heal." I had no answer for that. Cold knot formed in my stomach. It felt like yesterday that just 10% of her power was an overwhelming force, a mountain I couldn't even imagine climbing. The memory of her pinning me with a single claw, of her voice shaking the very foundations of her lair, was still sharp and clear. Had I really come that far? If I were at my peak, she added, a corner of her mouth twitching into a wry, draconic smile. I could still throw you around this room like a child's toy until you learned your lesson, but I am not at my peak. And you are no longer a child. She let the silence sit between us for a moment, then tapped a long black claw against a stone railing. You need a partner who can absorb your mistakes without breaking. Someone whose foundation is absolute. You have one option that isn't suicidally reckless for both of you. Alice. My mother, I said. The words felt strange, like a name from a book I'd only read once. Tiamat nodded. Your relationship is complicated. I know, but she is the only person on this planet I am certain can safely neutralize you at this level. She is stronger than I am right now. A short, humorless laugh, like rocks tumbling, escaped her. Honestly, she is stronger than most versions of me, peak or not. Even after my breakthrough? I asked, the question feeling foolish as soon as I said it. Especially now, she confirmed. If you fight her perfectly, using everything you have learned, you might manage a few even exchanges. But she will always be the one setting the pace. More importantly, she can help you refine your gifts without you accidentally leveling a mountain range. As for your sword, she lifted a scaled shoulder in a shrug that could have caused a landslide. You are reaching for something only you can unlock. She can keep you grounded while you do it. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. The disappointment of not being able to train with Tiamat was a sharp sting, but it was overshadowed by a profound respect for her wisdom and honesty. Of course, it had to be her. The person who taught me the rules is the only one who can keep me from breaking them. I understand, I said. The hardness in Tiamat's eyes softened. Good. You came here asking for a fight. What you truly need is a wall that doesn't move. Go find the woman who builds them. I left the deep, volcanic heat of the southern ridgeline and stepped into the cool, clean air of an Avalon transit station. The journey back to the penthouse was quiet, giving me time to process. You are too strong now. It was a strange and deeply unsettling problem to have. For my entire life, I had been fighting up, struggling against opponents who were bigger, stronger, more experienced. Now, the greatest danger was my own lack of control. Walking through the bustling station, I found myself moving more carefully, consciously holding my power in, terrified that a careless gesture might have unintended consequences. The world suddenly felt more fragile. I thought of my mother, not the fragmented ghost from my childhood, but Alice, the woman who had returned to my life and, instead of offering easy comfort, had offered structure. Her lessons were quiet phrases that felt like laws of nature. Choose boring first. Boring builds. The law isn't a hammer. It's a promise. By the time the elevator doors opened to our floor, I knew what I had to do. This wasn't a son asking his mother for help. This was a student seeking a master for a very specific, very dangerous lesson. The penthouse was quiet. The lights were dimmed for the evening, and the faint, pleasant scent of Reka's scones still lingered in the air. I found Alice on the main balcony, looking out at the city lights that glittered below like a fallen constellation. She wore simple sleep clothes and held a steaming mug, her presence as calm and steady as the stone railing she leaned against. She didn't turn as I approached. I stood beside her, looking out at the same view. I didn't know how to start with small talk, so I didn't try. I went to see Tiamat, I said into the cool night air. Alice took a slow sip of her tea. And I asked her to train with me, I said. She said no. She said if I made a mistake, I would kill her. Alice finally turned her head, her gaze meeting mine in the soft light from the living room. Her eyes weren't filled with motherly concern, but with the clear, assessing focus of a master craftsman looking at a powerful but untamed tool. Tiamat is wise, she said simply. Your control has not yet caught up to your power. She said you could help. I went on, my voice steady. She said you're the only one strong enough to be my partner. A wall that won't move. Alice set her mug down on the railing, the ceramic making a soft, deliberate click against the stone. She studied my face for a long moment, reading everything I wasn't saying, the frustration, the fear, the reluctant necessity of my being here. Then she gave a single, decisive nod. Tiamat is a force of nature. I am an architect, Alice said, her voice as calm as the night. You don't need another storm to teach you how to control a storm. You need a foundation that will not yield. She is correct. She turned back to the glittering city. Your foundation is strong, but the structure you've built on top of it is unstable. We will fix that. The simple finality of her words was both a comfort and a terror. The lessons start tomorrow, she said. Meet me here at dawn. We will begin with a single line. Chapter 10:16. A vessel too small. The lessons began at dawn on the penthouse balcony. The air was cool and clean, the rising sun casting long shadows across the city of Avalon. Alice stood opposite me, her presence as calm and unreadable as the morning sky. You have chosen your project, she said, her voice a quiet law, to fulfill an old promise by creating a new path for an old art. Before you can build, I must see the foundation. Show me the art as it exists. Perform it as perfectly as you know how. I nodded. This was familiar ground. I settled into the opening stance of the Mount Hua form, the movements a deep-seated memory in my bones. I let my high radiant power recede, drawing only on the simple, clean mana required for the art. I was not Arthur Nightingale, the high radiant with sword accord. For this moment, I was just a swordsman honoring a tradition. I began. First movement, Violet Sunset Genesis. I moved, and a fine, shimmering mist of perfect violet energy bloomed from my hands, spreading across the balcony. It was beautiful, ethereal, and masterfully controlled, obscuring the world not with a heavy fog, but with a dreamy, disorienting haze. Second movement, Fan of the Scattering Pearls. I swept my hands in a wide, fanning motion. The mist coalesced into hundreds of tiny, bead-like projectiles, each one a perfect sphere of violet light. They shot across the balcony with a soft, hissing sound, striking a containment field in a glittering, perfectly distributed pattern. Third movement, Crimson Sunset. I drew the mist back, its color deepening from violet to a bloody crimson. I shaped it into a single, devastating blade of pure energy and executed a powerful, finishing strike that left a searing, temporary line on the air itself. The form was flawless. Fourth movement, Natural Paradox. I let the crimson energy dissolve, returning to the violet mist. I moved through it, my form seeming to split and create a dozen afterimages, turning the mist into a disorienting hall of mirrors, a clever, conceptual defense. I finished the sequence and stood in the center of the gently swirling mist, my breath even. It was a perfect recitation, the art performed at the very peak of its potential. Alice was not impressed. That was a perfect recitation of a poem written for children, she critiqued, her voice cutting and precise. It is beautiful, it is skillful, and it is utterly useless for the man you are now. She gestured at the gentle mist. This art was designed for a river. You are now an ocean. The vessel is too small for the power you carry. She took a step forward, her gaze sharpening. Perform it again, but do not use the river. Do not use simple mana. Use yourself. Use the gray. A knot of apprehension tightened in my gut. I knew what would happen. I had already seen it in my training with Tiamat. But an instruction was an instruction. I took a breath, centered myself, and performed the first movement again, this time opening the gate to the transcendent power born of pure light and deep dark. The result was instantaneous and chaotic. A thick, roiling fog of pure gray erupted from me, the color of refusal and deep space. It was not a violet mist. It was a heavy, oppressive blanket that swallowed the morning light and felt like metaphysical static against the skin. The air grew cold, and the scent was not of plum blossoms, but of rain on stone and the silence between possibilities. It's too much, I said, struggling to control the output. The gray didn't want to be a subtle haze. It wanted to be an absolute statement. Of course it is, Alice said. The form was not designed for this language. Continue. I forced myself into the second movement, fan of the scattering pearls. I tried to shape the heavy gray fog into delicate blossoms. It refused. Instead, the fog condensed into jagged, unstable shards of folded space. They didn't scatter. They tore through the air with a silent, vicious hunger, striking the containment field with enough force to make it groan, leaving behind tiny, spiderwebbing cracks in reality that slowly healed. It was brutally effective, but it was not the art. It was just violence. I stopped. I couldn't continue. The third and fourth movements were even more complex, and I knew I couldn't force the gray into those shapes without losing control entirely. I let the gray fog dissipate, leaving the air on the balcony feeling strangely thin and empty. I see the problem, I said, my voice rough with effort. The violet mist art is a language of suggestion, written with mana, Alice diagnosed, walking toward me. The gray is a language of absolute truth, written with the grammar of the universe. You cannot speak both at the same time and expect a coherent sentence. You are shouting a whisper. She stopped in front of me. Your project, therefore, is not simply to add a fifth movement. It is to translate the entire art into this new, more powerful language. You must deconstruct every form, every stance, every intent, and rebuild it from the foundation up. You must teach this art how to bear the weight of the gray. Only then can you create a fifth movement that is a true conclusion, and not just a clumsy postscript. I looked at my hands. She was right. The challenge was far greater than I had imagined. It wasn't an addition. It was a complete reinvention. Where do I start? I asked. At the beginning, she said simply. You will learn how to make your ocean fit inside a teacup without breaking it or spilling a single drop. You will learn to make the gray whisper. She gestured to the empty space. Again, the first movement. But this time, do not try to create a mist. Create a single, perfect gray plum blossom. One. And make it float. I spent the rest of the morning in a state of deep, humbling frustration. It was the hardest magical training I had ever undertaken. I could call down lightning. I could fold space. I could make the world agree with my blade. But I could not make one simple, weightless flower out of the gray. Every time I tried, the result was a failure. Either I used too much power, and a heavy, jagged crystal of gray would form and clatter to the floor, or I used too little, and the energy would dissipate into nothing. I couldn't find the balance. The gray was a power of yes or no, of is or is not. It did not understand, maybe. It did not understand gentle. Stop thinking of it as a thing you are building. Alice guided me from the side. Think of it as a choice you are making. The blossom is not the goal. The state of being that results in a blossom is the goal. I took a breath, centering myself, reaching for the stillness that Julius had taught me. I let go of the image of the blossom. I focused on the concept. A choice, written small. A moment of quiet refusal. I performed the kata, not as a container for my power, but as a conduit for that single, quiet idea. A single, gray plum blossom bloomed in the air before me. It was the color of a storm cloud, and it did not float. It simply hung in the air, as if distance were a suggestion it was politely ignoring. It was perfect. It held for 3 seconds and then vanished. It was the first word in a new language. I had a long, long way to go. Chapter 1017, Choices Written Small. The single, gray plum blossom hung in the air before me. It was the color of a storm cloud, and it did not float. It simply was, as if distance were a suggestion it was politely ignoring. It held for 3 perfect, silent seconds and then vanished. It was the first word I had spoken in a new and profoundly difficult language. Again, Alice said from the edge of the balcony, her voice a calm, implacable command. For the next hour, that was my only drill. I stood in the center of the balcony, the city of Avalon waking below me, and practiced making a single flower. It was a humbling, infuriating exercise. My instincts, honed by years of high-stakes combat, screamed at me to do more, to be faster, to be more powerful. But every time I let my power surge, the result was a heavy, jagged crystal of useless gray that clattered to the floor. Every time I tried to force the shape, the delicate balance of pure light and deep dark would collapse. I had to be still. I had to be empty. I had to let the perfect, silent form of the kata be the conduit, drawing the power out of me rather than me pushing it through. "You are learning to be quiet," Alice observed, as I managed to create a string of 5 consecutive, stable blossoms. "You are learning that control is not the same as force. Now, the real lesson begins. The first movement is not genesis of a single blossom. Show me the mist." The jump in scale was immense. Creating one perfect, static thought was one thing. Creating an entire atmosphere of it was another. My first attempt was a disaster. I tried to replicate the mental state that created the blossom, but 1,000 times over. The result was a thick, oppressive fog of gray, heavy with metaphysical static. It was the same artless, brute force effect I had produced the day before. "You are trying to hold one perfect thought and multiply it," Alice critiqued, her voice cutting through the dense fog. "A mist is not a collection of perfect thoughts. It is one thought allowed to expand and be imperfect at the edges. You are still thinking like a sculptor trying to control every angle. Be a painter. Let the color bleed." I dispelled the fog and tried again, focusing on her words. "Let it bleed." I performed the kata, and this time I focused on creating a single point of quiet, gray potential in the air before me. Then, instead of trying to build upon it, I simply let it go. I released my absolute control and allowed it to expand on its own. The result was a thin, wispy vapor that held for a moment before dissipating entirely. "Better," Alice said, "but it has no substance. It is a sigh, not a whisper. Your intent is gone." "First you were making a single sad flower," Valeria commented from the quiet of my mind. "Now you're doing conceptual weather patterns. Do try to make it rain something interesting." This was the contradiction. To create the mist, I had to let go of control. But to make it last, it needed my intent. For days, I struggled with this paradox. The balcony was filled with either heavy, useless fogs or thin, fleeting vapors. I was either shouting or saying nothing at all. The breakthrough, when it came, was not about power. It was about philosophy. I stopped trying to make a mist. Instead, I focused on the purpose of the mist in the art, to create a field of questions of uncertainty. I performed the kata, and at its apex, I used Mythweaver to write a single, silent edict into the heart of the gray I was gathering. What if? It was a question, not a statement. It was an invitation to uncertainty. And the gray, a power of absolute truth, was forced to interpret that question. It bloomed. The mist that filled the balcony was perfect. It was a soft, swirling fog the color of rain on stone. It didn't feel heavy. Felt thoughtful. It obscured the view not by being opaque, but by offering too many possibilities, too many phantom shapes and half-seen movements. It was a physical manifestation of a question. "Good," Alice said, a note of genuine approval in her voice. "You have created a question. Now ask it." I transitioned seamlessly into the second movement, fan of the scattering pearls. My old habit was to think of them as projectiles, as weapons. But Alice's lessons echoed in my mind. They are not bullets. They are a doubt. I let the form of the art guide me. As my hands swept in a wide, fanning motion, I drew upon the gray mist. But I didn't just shape it. I gave it another quiet Mythweaver command, an intent for the blossoms that would be born from it. Distract. The mist coalesced, not into jagged shards, but into hundreds of gray plum blossoms. They were choices written small, just as Tiamat had described them, and they carried my intent. They didn't fly in straight, aggressive lines. They drifted from my hands, swirling and dancing on invisible currents, each one moving with a mesmerizing, unpredictable grace. They weren't aimed at a target. Their purpose was to make a target impossible to find. They were a beautiful, cascading storm of pure misdirection. You have progressed from static object creation to dynamic field manipulation, Erebus observed. The next logical step is controlled projection within that field. I held the swirling cloud of blossoms for a long moment, feeling a sense of mastery I hadn't felt since entering the tower. I had done it. I had taken the most absolute, honest power I knew, and I had taught it to be a beautiful, deceptive poet. The art is a language, Alice said, her voice pulling me from my reverie. You have learned its basic grammar. You have spoken your first 2 sentences. Do not be proud. A child who learns to ask why is still a child. The real work is in the answers you can provide. She gestured to the empty air. The third movement, the Crimson Sunset, is the art's answer. It is a statement of power. Show me how you can make your silent truth deliver a final word. I let the blossoms dissolve back into the mist. I took a breath. The next lesson had already begun. But as I settled into the stance for the third movement, I felt a new confidence settle in my bones. The path forward was no longer a mystery. It was a language I was finally beginning to understand. Chapter 10:18. Sunset's Last Light. I stood in the center of a swirling, thoughtful gray mist, a cloud of my own making. From it, I had sculpted blossoms of pure misdirection, choices written small that danced on the air. I had taken the first 2 movements of the violet divine mist art and successfully translated them into the language of the gray. I had found the grammar. You have learned to ask a question? Alice said from the edge of the balcony, her voice cutting through my concentration. But the art is a conversation. It requires answers. The third movement, the Crimson Sunset, is the art's primary answer. It is a statement of power. Show me how you can make your silent truth deliver a final word. I let the blossoms dissolve back into the mist. I took a breath, centered myself, and began the kata for the third movement. It was a form I knew well, designed to gather energy and release it in a single, devastatingly powerful strike. My old self would have poured all his power into it, a grand, theatrical blow. My new self, the high radiant with sword accord, instinctively reached for the gray to create a massive, tearing rift in space. The result was a disaster. The air shrieked as I bent it to my will, a loud, ugly sound of raw, uncontrolled power. It was brutally effective, a sledgehammer blow that would have shattered mountains, but it was artless. It was a shout. A conclusion is not a weapon. Alice's voice was sharp with critique. It is a result. You are still shouting. The art calls for a crimson sunset, a moment of beautiful, quiet finality, not a noisy explosion. Find the silence in your power. For a week I failed. Every attempt to create a powerful strike with the gray was a violent, chaotic spectacle. I was caught between my old habits of overwhelming force and the new, subtle language I was trying to learn. The gray did not want to be a beautiful sunset. It wanted to be a final, absolute verdict. The answer, again, came from the quiet lessons of the tower. From Julius. Sword Accord wasn't about hitting harder. It was about the world agreeing with the cut. The inevitable edge wasn't a powerful swing. It was a simple, undeniable truth. I tried a new approach. I performed the kata, but this time I did not try to project a blade of gray. I did not try to gather power. I simply used the perfect, silent form of the art to present the world with a single, undeniable truth. Using the gray as the medium and myth-weaver as the pen, I wrote one edict along a single, perfect line in front of me. This line is cut. There was no flash, no sound, no tearing of space, but the containment shield at the far end of the balcony, which had stood firm against all my previous, noisy assaults, suddenly registered a deep, clean score mark, as if an impossibly sharp, invisible knife had been drawn across it. It was a silent, absolute cut, made of pure intent and the world's quiet agreement. Oh, I like that one, Valeria purred in my mind. Very passive-aggressive. It cuts you and then pretends it was never there. I had found the art's answer. The silent cut. The fourth movement, Natural Paradox, was next. In its original form, it was a simple illusion, a creation of afterimages. With my power, it could be so much more. My initial attempts were already impressive, I could use gray weaving to create momentary, alternate possibilities, ghosts of myself taking a different step, making a different parry. Alice was, as always, unimpressed. "They are good copies," she critiqued, walking through one of my gray phantoms as if it were smoke. "But they are empty. They are lies your opponent's senses can eventually see through. A perfect lie must contain a grain of truth." She was challenging me to integrate my gifts further. I performed the kata again, weaving the gray paradoxes, but this time, I infused each one with a tiny, flickering sliver of my Mythweaver gift. I wrote a single, temporary edict into each ghostly image. "This is a real step." The result was unnerving. The afterimages were no longer just transparent copies. They now carried a faint, convincing narrative weight. They felt real. They had presence. When Alice tried to walk through one, she actually hesitated for a fraction of a second, her senses arguing with her intellect. I had created the woven lie. By the end of the 3rd month, I had deconstructed and reconstructed all 4 movements. I could now perform the art not as the Mount Hua sect did, but in my own unique way. The violet mist was the gray mist. The scattering pearls were gray blossoms. The crimson sunset was the silent cut. The natural paradox was the woven lie. I had taken their beautiful, elegant poem and translated it into a new, more powerful and dangerous language. But the promise was not to translate. It was to add a 5th verse. For weeks I was stuck. I had a complete, 4-part symphony of control. What could possibly come next? I tried to create a more powerful strike, a more complex illusion. Every attempt felt like a clumsy addition, an extra sentence tacked onto the end of a perfect story. "You are trying to add another verse?" Alice observed one morning, as I stood frustrated in the center of a cloud of my gray mist. "The poem is already complete. It does not need another verse. It needs a title. It needs to know what it is about." Her words clicked into place with the force of a revelation. The first 4 movements were all tools to affect an opponent. The art, for all its beauty, lacked a core principle. It didn't control the fundamental truth of the battlefield. My new philosophy, the one born in the ashes of my old self in the tower, was about setting the rules, making the floor honest. I stood in the center of the training space. I performed the first movement, creating the gray mist, the field of swirling possibilities and choices written small. But this time, I did not move to the second movement. I held the mist, a perfect, stable atmosphere of spatial and temporal uncertainty. And then I began to write on it. I didn't add more gray. I infused the existing mist with my other gifts, creating the final, perfect synthesis. First, I used my lucent harmony as the ink. I poured the concept of honesty, of pure, undeniable truth, into the very particles of the mist. The gray was a field of refusal and possibility. Harmony was a field of absolute order. The 2 concepts should have been contradictory. But my 8-circle research had taught me that contradictions don't need resolution. They need a state of stable tension. I used the balancing principles of the gray itself, the perfect opposition of pure light and deep dark, to stabilize this new, conceptually heavy atmosphere. Finally, I used my Mythweaver gift to write the single, binding edict that would serve as the title for the entire art, a law that would govern the field itself. Within this light, there are no lies. The mist transformed. It was still the color of a storm cloud, but it now carried a faint, internal golden luminescence from the harmony woven within it. It no longer just obscured. It illuminated. This was the 5th movement, not an attack, a transformation. Sunset's last light. "You have created a localized field of absolute conceptual integrity," Erebus's voice noted in my mind. "Most impressive." "Show me," Alice said, her voice quiet. I performed the full 5-movement gray divine mist art for her. The gray mist of Genesis. The swirling, distracting blossoms of the pearls. The breathtaking, invisible strike of the silent cut. The convincing, woven lie of the paradox. And then, at the end, I activated Sunset's last light. The entire field of mist clarified. It became a domain of pure, absolute truth. Alice created an illusion of herself, her most complex one. The moment it touched the mist, it dissolved into a shower of harmless light. She threw a feint, but in the mist, I saw the true attack as a sharp, clear line of intent. I parried it with a simple, easy motion. I held the mist for another minute, feeling its properties. It was a domain of pure clarity. It was the ultimate expression of my new self. A space where battles were won not with power or speed, but with the simple, absolute advantage of knowing the truth. I let the mist dissolve, the effort leaving me breathing heavily but feeling a sense of quiet, profound completion. I looked at Alice. Her face was calm, but I saw a new light in her eyes. It was a deep, analytical pride. "You have fulfilled your promise," she said. "More than that, you have created a new language." She gave a rare, genuine smile. "You are ready to show it to them." Chapter 1019. A Quiet Street. The intense, 3-month crucible of training with my mother had ended. I had deconstructed an ancient art and rebuilt it in my own image, forging a new language for my power. The work was done. The promise was ready to be kept. But before the mountain there was the city. Cecilia, with her usual terrifying efficiency, had mandated a period of systemic decompression. In less formal terms, she told me to take a day off before I forgot how. And I knew exactly how I wanted to spend it. Finding Serafina was easy. She was in the penthouse's small, climate-controlled conservatory, a space she had slowly transformed into a miniature Arctic wonderland. Crystalline frost ferns grew in elegant, geometric patterns, and the air was cool and clean with the scent of winter. She was sitting on a simple stone bench, reading from a physical book, her silver hair a stark, beautiful contrast to the deep green of the ferns. "I am under strict orders to decompress," I announced from the doorway. She looked up, her ice-blue eyes holding a hint of amusement. "From the Empress, I presume?" "Indeed," I said, "and I have decided that the optimal method for systemic decompression involves a tour of Avalon's finest and most overpriced coffee establishments. But I require an expert guide." A rare, small smile touched her lips. "I see. And you believe I am qualified for this important mission. You're the only one I know who takes the art of the perfect latte as seriously as a 9-circle magical theorem," I said. "Your expertise is essential." She closed her book, a quiet, graceful motion. "Very well. For the sake of the Empire's stability, I will assist you in your research." An hour later, we were not Arthur Nightingale, second hero of the Empire, and Serafina Zenith, the Frost Princess of Mount Hua. We were just two people, lost in the vibrant, bustling heart of Avalon City. We had both used simple, subtle illusions not to create false faces, but just to soften our own, to make them less recognizable. My hair was a shade darker, my features a little less distinct. Serafina's silver hair was a soft, snowy white, and her impossibly blue eyes were a more common shade of gray. We were anonymous, and it was a heady, wonderful freedom. Serafina, it turned out, was a ruthless coffee critic. The first cafe, a trendy place with minimalist decor, was dismissed almost immediately. "The atmosphere is trying too hard," she whispered to me, taking a delicate sip of her espresso. "It's all presentation and no substance. The coffee tastes loud." I, who could barely tell the difference between one dark, hot liquid and another, just nodded seriously. A critical flaw. We must continue our search. The second place was a tiny, hole-in-the-wall establishment tucked away in a quiet side street, the air thick with the rich, dark scent of roasting beans. An old man with a magnificent white beard nodded to us as we entered. Serafina's expression immediately softened. "This is better," she murmured. She ordered for both of us, a quiet, confident exchange with the owner that involved words I didn't understand. The lattes he produced were, to my uneducated palate, delicious. To Serafina, they were a work of art. "The balance is perfect," she said. Her eyes closed in concentration as she took her first sip. The bitterness of the coffee, the sweetness of the milk, the texture of the foam. It's a state of controlled opposition, a perfect, stable equilibrium. Like my new 8-circle method, I said, and she shot me a look, a tiny smile playing on her lips. Everything is a magical theorem to you, isn't it? Only the important things, I replied. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the city go by outside the small window. People hurried past, their faces a mix of worry and purpose, their minds on deadlines and appointments. Here, in our little bubble of anonymity, we had none. It's good to see you like this, I said quietly. Relaxed. It is good to be like this, she confessed, her gaze fixed on the street. At the sect, there is always a weight, a history. Here, I am just a person who enjoys a well-made latte. I noticed the way her power felt, a quiet, steady hum beneath her calm exterior. It was different, stronger, deeper. The last vestiges of the low radiant rank were gone, replaced by the clean, solid weight of a true mid-radiant. She had broken through quietly, without fanfare, on her own terms. You've been training, I observed. She met my gaze, a flicker of pride in her cool, gray eyes. The tower changed things. Watching you provided a new perspective, a new goal. We left the little cafe and walked through the city's grand central park. The autumn leaves were a riot of red and gold, and the air was crisp. We talked about everything and nothing. She told me about a new book of poetry she was reading. I told her about Stella's latest attempt to use probability calculations to win at a card game. We didn't talk about demons or magic or the fate of the world. For a few precious hours, we were just two people on a date. She had a quiet, dry wit that few people ever got to see. When a street performer dramatically pretended to be frozen in place, she leaned over to me and whispered, "His technique is sloppy. He is still breathing from his chest." When a small child ran past, chasing a flock of pigeons, she watched with a rare, unguarded softness. I bought her a simple, warm scarf from a street vendor, a deep, violet color that reminded me of her art. She wrapped it around her neck, the soft wool a stark contrast to her usual, pristine silks. She looked beautiful. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the park, we found ourselves standing by a quiet, ornamental pond. The city's lights were beginning to glitter to life, a man-made constellation at our feet. The day was ending, and with it, our brief, stolen peace. The mountain, and the promise I had made there, was waiting. "Serafina," I began, my voice a little rougher than I intended. She turned to me, her face framed by the soft violet scarf, her expression calm and patient. "My training is done," I said. I've created it, the fifth movement." Her eyes widened slightly, the only sign of her surprise. "You have." "I have," I confirmed. "And I need to present it to your father, to your sect. I'm leaving for Mount Hua tomorrow." I paused, taking a breath. "I want you to come with me." She searched my face, her gaze deep and analytical. "You are not asking me to come as your fiancé, or as a diplomatic courtesy." "No," I said. "I'm asking you to come as my partner, as an artist. I want you to be there when I show them what I've made of their art. And I want you to be the one who takes it and makes it better." Chapter 10:20. A New Language. The city lights of Avalon glittered in Serafina's eyes as she stood before me in the twilight of the park. Her hand was cool in mine, her expression a mask of fierce, crystalline resolve. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and sure. "I will come with you." "Good," I said. "We leave now." She blinked, the only sign of her surprise. "Now? But the arrangements, the transport." "We aren't taking a transport," I said, my voice quiet. I gently released her hand and put my arm around her waist. A firm, grounding pressure. She stiffened for a fraction of a second, then relaxed into my hold, her trust absolute. I looked from her face to the darkening sky. The distance to Mount Hua was thousands of miles. To the gray, it was just the next page. I drew on its power, not as a seam but as a fold. I took the map of the world that lived in my mind, put one finger on the park in Avalon and another on the highest peak of Mount Hua, and simply creased the page. The world dissolved. The scent of autumn leaves and cool city air was replaced by a rush of silent, silver-gray energy. For a single, disorienting heartbeat, we were nowhere and everywhere at once, a place of pure possibility between one step and the next. Then the world snapped back into place with the solid finality of a closing book. The cold, clean air of the mountain summit hit us. We were standing in the center of the Mount Hua Sec's main training ground, a vast, circular platform of polished black stone that overlooked a sea of clouds dyed orange and pink by the setting sun. The entire sect was assembled for their evening katas. Hundreds of disciples froze mid-motion, their mouths agape, their eyes wide with shock and disbelief at the two figures who had just materialized from thin air. At the head of the platform, the sect's masters and elders stood in stunned silence. My old master, Li Zenith, was the first to recover. His eyes, reservoirs of calm, widened for a moment before a look of profound, dawning comprehension, and then immense pride settled on his face. Beside him, Lady Sun stared at Seraphina, her stepdaughter, her expression of cold dislike now mixed with a healthy dose of awe and fear. And at the center of them all stood Mo Zenith, the sect leader. He stared at me, not with the anger of a man whose sanctuary had been breached, but with the focused, piercing gaze of a master who had just witnessed an impossible technique. Li Zenith stepped forward and bowed his head, his voice a quiet rumble that cut through the stunned silence. "Arthur Nightingale," he said, "the mountain welcomes you." "Master Li," I replied, my voice carrying in the thin, cold air as I returned the bow. Mo Zenith found his voice, which boomed with authority across the platform. "An unexpected arrival, second hero. To what do we owe the honor?" "I have come to fulfill my promise," I answered, and my voice was clear and steady. A murmur went through the assembled disciples. A 6-year-old promise, made when I was just a talented student, to create a fifth and final movement for their sacred art. They had likely assumed it was a forgotten boast. "You have chosen an auspicious time," Mo Zenith said, his gaze intense. "The entire sect is gathered. If you have something to show us, you have our full attention." I nodded once. I released Seraphina's waist, and she moved to stand beside her uncle, her head held high, no longer just the returning daughter but a princess of her house witnessing a historic moment. I stepped forward to the center of the platform. I did not draw Valeria. This was not about my art. It was about theirs. I took a breath of the cold mountain air and began. First movement, Violet Sunset Genesis. But the mist that bloomed was not violet. It was the color of a storm cloud seen from above, shot through with silver. It was a gray mist. It didn't just obscure. It felt thoughtful, offering 1,000 possibilities, 1,000 phantom shapes, making certainty impossible. Second movement, Fan of the Scattering Pearls. The gray mist coalesced, not into simple projectiles, but into hundreds of gray plum blossoms. They did not fly in straight, aggressive lines. They drifted, they swirled. They chose their own paths with a mesmerizing, intelligent grace. They were choices written small, a beautiful, cascading storm of pure misdirection. Third movement, Crimson Sunset. I drew the mist back. The form was a powerful, finishing strike. But there was no blade of crimson energy. There was no sound. I simply drew a line in the air. Across the platform, a deep, clean score mark appeared on a massive practice boulder, as if an impossibly sharp, invisible knife had been drawn across it. The silent cut, a statement of fact, not of force. Fourth movement, Natural Paradox. I moved through the mist, and my form seemed to split. But these were not simple afterimages. They were woven lies. Each gray phantom carried a flicker of narrative weight, a sliver of my myth-weaver gift that made them feel real, their intentions almost tangible. Then I stopped. I stood in the center of the swirling gray mist, and the entire mountain seemed to hold its breath. I brought my hands together and slowly sheathed my imaginary sword. The final movement began. Fifth movement, Sunset's Last Light. I took a single, steadying breath. I infused my will, my lucent harmony, into the gray mist itself. It was not an attack. It was an edict. Within this light, there are no lies. The mist transformed. The stormy gray was shot through with a faint, internal golden luminescence. It no longer just obscured. It illuminated. The entire platform was suffused with a feeling of absolute, undeniable clarity. Every disciple could suddenly feel the sincerity of their neighbor's stance, the quiet strength of their masters. All deception was stripped away. I held the domain of truth for a count of 10, a silent, absolute statement. Then, with another slow breath, I let it dissolve into the clean mountain air. I turned to Mo Zenith and bowed. The promise is kept. The sect leader stared at the empty air where the mist had been, his stern face a mask of pure, unadulterated awe. He looked at the impossible cut on the boulder. He looked at his daughter. Finally, he looked at me. He bowed his head, a gesture of profound respect from one of the world's great masters. "You have not just added to our art," he said, his voice filled with a new kind of weight. "You have given it a new language, a new soul." I walked over to where Serafina stood. Her ice-blue eyes were wide, shining with an intense, analytical light. She had not just watched. She had studied every nuance. The art was a language of mana and suggestion. I said to her, my voice for her alone. "I have translated it into the language of the gray. It is more powerful now, more absolute." I met her gaze, and I made sure she understood the weight of my next words. "But it is an outsider's translation. It is the best that I can do for your art, but it may not be faithful to its original soul. You, Serafina, can do better. You can take this new grammar and make it your own. You can make it true to the heart of Mount Hua." Her expression, which had been one of awe, now hardened into one of fierce, crystalline resolve. Her path, which had been uncertain, was now a straight, clear line. She turned to her father. "Father," she said, her voice ringing with a new authority, "I request permission to enter isolation training. I will not emerge until I have mastered this new art and made it our own." Mo Zenith looked at his daughter, and for the first time, I saw him not as a sect leader, but as a father, filled with a deep, overwhelming pride. "Permission granted," he said without hesitation. He then turned back to me. "Arthur Nightingale," he said, his voice booming across the now murmuring platform. "You have honored this house and this old man's faith in a way that words cannot repay. The Mount Hua sect is in your debt." The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sea of clouds in fiery colors. The day was done. The promise was kept. "It is late," Mo Zenith said, his formality softening slightly. "You will stay the night. You are an honored guest of this mountain." I looked at Serafina, who was already turning to her uncle, her mind clearly racing with the new possibilities, the new challenges. Her journey was just beginning. "I accept," I said. "Thank you."